To understand Jenny, you need to start with the fact that she is beautiful. But the word beautiful is not enough here. It's not just an attractiveness that catches the eye for a moment or earns a nod of approval. I'm talking about beauty that literally takes your breath away, making you question the reality of what you see. This is the rarest beauty, such that it seems almost impossible. Unless you live in New York or Paris cities where you encounter this phenomenon a little more often in your entire life, you will probably meet no more than 4 women who can compare with Jenny. Her face resembles a work of art, where every feature is impeccably sculpted. Eyes that reflect light as if pieces of the sky itself were hidden in them. Lips that radiate softness and mystery. Skin that glows with such freshness as if it is always under the rays of the gentle sun. Her hair, as if sculpted by golden hands, flows in soft waves, attracting the eye and encouraging you to dream about what it would be like to run your hand through it. Jenny has that rare magic that makes those around her lose touch with reality. People on the street, seeing her, seem to forget about everything. I saw passers-by stop in the middle of busy sidewalks, as if they had suddenly forgotten where they were going. I have seen car drivers slam on the brakes, almost crashing into those in front, only to stare at her longer, sticking their heads out of the windows, and then stammeringly making excuses to those honking behind them. This is the beauty that gives birth to stories. Colleagues return to the office and, barely containing their delight, say, "You won't believe it, but I just saw the most beautiful woman in my life." They add details: how she looked, what she wore, how the wind played with the hem of her dress, as if these moments have become something sacred, worth remembering. Jenny is not just a beautiful woman. This is a person whose presence makes you think about how many miracles the world hides. Seeing her is experiencing a moment that is forever etched in your memory. It's like meeting something unearthly that turns your ideas about what the ideal looks like. Jenny is a woman who is about 5 feet 8 inches tall and seems to be the epitome of elegance and sophistication. Her figure is graceful and slender, with such harmonious proportions that they could be taken as a standard of beauty drawn by the artist himself. Every movement she makes, be it a light walk or turning her head, seems smooth, as if choreographed. Her hair is straight, smooth, and shiny, like honey silk, flowing over her shoulders, reaching just below their line. They look as if the sun's rays, penetrating through transparent gold, froze in these strands. When the wind gently plays with them, you get the feeling that nature is coming to life in front of you, subtle, soft, and warm. Jenny's face is perfectly symmetrical. A small, straight nose gives her appearance a subtle sophistication, and high cheekbones, as if carved from marble, add aristocracy. However, it is the skin that fascinates the most. She is so radiant and smooth that she seems to glow from within, defying time and highlighting her extraordinary beauty, even now in her mid-40s. Her appearance suggests that true beauty is not subject to age. And of course, her eyes. This is a different story. Blue, like the morning sky, filled with limitless depth and light. They amaze with their clarity, their ability to hypnotize and make you forget about everything else. These eyes are reminiscent of the most flawless sapphires that you could see in the best jewelry houses, only alive, full of energy and emotion. They contain a whole world full of mysteries and attraction. Jenny's beauty is in a special category. There are many types of attractiveness in the world, and each of them is mesmerizing in its own way. Some women exude a raw, stunning sexuality that will sweep you off your feet. Looking at them, you feel a fire ignite in your blood, as if at that very second their beauty requires something physical, urgent. An example of this kind of magnetism can be Angelina Jolie, who literally captures with her energy. But Jenny is completely different. Her beauty is devoid of challenge or provocation. She has that rare kind of grace that makes people feel like awestruck spectators in the presence of a masterpiece. This is more than physical admiration. It is an emotional thrill comparable to what you experience when you see a perfect painting in a gallery or an incredible sunset over the sea. Her appearance seems perfect, almost divine, as if nature decided to demonstrate what she is capable of in her greatness. Being next to Jenny, you feel a special warmth, as if her presence illuminates the space around. You find yourself not wanting to look away, as if her image has some kind of healing magic. You want to be closer to her, to feel her presence. But this desire does not immediately become sexual. It has a more subtle nature, like a romantic admiration that fills you with awe and inspiration. You want this beauty to stay with you as a most valuable memory that you want to take home, put in a prominent place in your heart and cherish like a priceless work of art. Jenny has been so incredibly beautiful since childhood that her life has always been special. She stood out among her peers starting in kindergarten, attracting the attention both positive and negative that comes with such an appearance. Teachers often saw the best in her, believing that her beauty reflected inner perfection. Throughout elementary and middle school, Jenny received excellent grades, even if her work deserved a slightly lower grade. In high school, something changed. The teachers, most of whom were men, felt awkward and confused when interacting with Jenny. They simply couldn't treat her as harshly as her classmates. Her beauty confused them. She continued to get excellent grades without much effort, and her letters of recommendation for college were glowing. Although Jenny had friends, boys her age treated her the same way their teachers did, only more timidly. They just couldn't flirt with her as easily as they could with other girls. Even the bravest could only mutter, "Hi, Jenny," as they passed by. Tim Kramer, captain of the football team and the most popular guy in school, spent weeks trying to work up the courage to ask Jenny to the movies. One day, he even decided to call her, but when she answered the phone, he pretended that he was calling about homework. After that, he gave up and was content with other girls who willingly agreed to go on a date with him. Only older men, and then only a few, could overcome their delight and actually talk to Jenny. Her first affair was with a 36-year-old man named Stephen, the younger brother of a neighbor. They met at a street party in the summer, a couple of months after she became an adult. Stephen was an experienced and confident man. Recently divorced, he knew how to talk to women, even women like Jenny. She, in turn, was fascinated by a man who was not lost in front of her beauty. Their romance lasted almost a year. Jenny's parents were worried about the age difference, and her younger sister, Elizabeth, herself very beautiful, but nowhere near that level, was terribly jealous. However, Stephen was a caring man, and his attitude towards Jenny reassured her family. Their relationship was real in every sense. Jenny loved him sincerely, and Stephen, although not with the same ardor, was also attached to her. Their relationship became sexual a few months later. Jenny was lucky. Stephen was patient and gentle. He taught her to enjoy intimacy, saving her from the awkward first sexual experiences that often happen to young people. Although Jenny was kind and loving, she was not passionate. Sex brought her pleasure, but she rarely initiated it herself and did not miss it in Stephen's absence. What was more important to her was the feeling of closeness and his attention. This is not surprising, since Jenny has been accustomed to the constant attention of others since childhood. She did not know what it was like to be invisible, as most of us manage to do in a crowd. On the contrary, she perceived people's glances and approving whispers as an integral part of her existence. I hope I don't give the impression that Jenny was a narcissistic monster, obsessed with her appearance and oblivious to everyone around her. This is not true at all. On the contrary, she was a kind and sincere woman, whose cheerfulness attracted people no less than her external beauty. She had a soft, affectionate character and knew how to carry on a conversation or amuse with a witty joke at the right moment. Jenny never tried to use her beauty as a weapon or a means of manipulation, although she probably could have done it with ease. Her smile, warm and sincere, diffused any tense situation and made the people around her a little happier. However, it is undeniable that her incredible appearance greatly influenced her life and the way the world around her interacted with her. Being a girl of such exceptional beauty, she noticed from an early age that many things came to her much easier than to others. A smile could replace an explanation, a flutter of eyelashes could replace an argument, and her appearance in the room immediately changed the mood of those around her. People, captivated by her appearance, often sought to help her, without even considering whether she deserved or needed such a privilege. This imbalance gradually became woven into her life. She was unknowingly absolved of responsibility for minor errors or omissions. Teachers, bosses, co-workers all seemed more willing to forgive Jenny than anyone else. Friends put up with her shortcomings so easily as if they did not exist at all. Over time, for Jenny this became a familiar, almost natural state of affairs. She is accustomed to the fact that her charm, like some kind of invisible shield, protects her from many everyday difficulties. This does not mean that she deliberately used her beauty to make her life easier. In most cases, everything happened by itself, without her conscious participation. Jenny took it for granted as part of her reality, which she had lived with since childhood. Having gotten used to this, she sometimes didn't even notice that her life was structured differently than most people's. But this ease with which she received what others found difficult had an undeniable influence on her. It was as if the world around her was becoming simpler, becoming softer and more pliable, adapting to her. Over the years, this became something of a norm, which ceased to surprise her. And although she remained the same cheerful and kind Jenny, this privilege that arose from her exceptional beauty formed a certain perception of life in which she rarely had to truly fight for anything. Jenny was disconsolate when Stephen left, but her spirits were soon lifted by the approaching start of her freshman year of college at the University of Pennsylvania. Life at the university turned out to be very similar to the previous one. Everyone was stunned by her beauty, the teachers gave her excellent marks, and most of her male fellow students were afraid to even start a conversation. But at a large university like Penn State, there were also undergrads, graduate students, and faculty. And although the sight of Jenny caused them the same admiration, they were mature enough to come over and talk. In the first 2 years, Jenny had no shortage of admirers, and she had dates almost every weekend. Although she no longer had a serious relationship like she had with Stephen, she was often invited to meetings. We met in a sociology class when she was a sophomore, and I was a third year studying business administration. This course was one of those large lecture classes with about 120 people in the room. To make learning more effective, students were divided into small groups of 6 to discuss assignments and work together. Fate decreed that Jenny and I ended up in the same group. These meetings took place twice a week in the evening, and from the very beginning it was clear that Jenny stood out. Of course, her appearance was incredible, and at first I, like everyone else, could not take my eyes off her. But after a few weeks, as I got closer to her, I began to admire her not only because of her beauty, but also because of her character, which turned out to be no less amazing. Jenny was kind and generous, and it showed in the little things that often go unnoticed but make people special. For example, she quickly noticed that 2 of our group members were having difficulty with the material. These guys seemed to feel insecure, often became silent during discussions, and seemed to avoid difficult questions. Jenny did not remain indifferent. She looked for ways to help them, but did it so unobtrusively that it never occurred to anyone that it was help. Instead, her support seemed like a natural part of communication. She always found words to praise their contributions, even if they were small, and emphasized their strengths. If someone did poorly on an exam, she supported them with a kind word, gently reminding them that this was only a temporary difficulty that could be overcome. Moments like these showed her amazing ability to see the best in people and make them feel more confident. In addition, Jenny had a great sense of humor, which made our meetings especially enjoyable. She laughed with pleasure at our jokes, even if they were not very witty, which of course endeared her to everyone. But the real revelation was her own comments. Her wit was subtle but always precise, and she could deliver a joke in a way that instantly lifted the mood of the entire group. She had the rare gift of creating an atmosphere of lightness and friendliness around herself. Even the most boring tasks became a little less painful thanks to her presence. Jenny didn't just do her part, she made sure everyone felt comfortable and happy working together. And although at first her beauty was distracting and overshadowed everything else, it soon became obvious that her appearance was only one of her many gifts. Her humanity, generosity, and ability to see people for who they are was admirable and made her truly special. Not surprisingly, I soon began to think about Jenny in more serious ways than just admiring her from afar. Although I looked good, I knew I was out of her league. On the other hand, no one at Penn State was in her league, so it didn't bother me too much. I was confident, so I started thinking about how to ask Jenny out. I studied her interactions with other men without difficulty because she was invariably surrounded by admirers. Every time after our classes, I noticed how she was greeted by someone who was clearly trying to win her attention. These could be guys from her dorm, fellow students, or just those who found an excuse to be nearby. Sometimes she would announce with a smile that she had a meeting in the student center, or leave with someone who was patiently waiting for her outside the auditorium. It was obvious that she was the one who set the tone in this relationship. Jenny easily controlled the situation, even if she didn't realize it. She would make an appointment with Ted for 9 p.m., but not show up until 9:45, as if the wait time was part of their agreement. Or accepting Bob's dinner invitation, agreeing to spend Friday night with him, and then calling at the last minute and canceling plans without even giving it much thought. She would ask Andy to wait for her outside the classroom after class and make him stand there for another 10 minutes while she laughed carefreely with us in the group, as if she had forgotten he existed. Such situations happened frequently, and it was clear to me that Jenny was not making any effort to become the center of attraction for these young people. It just happened naturally. Her beauty and ease of communication attracted them like a magnet, but she herself did not seem to notice the power that she had over them. For her, all this was so familiar that fans turned into an integral part of her life, almost like background music, pleasant but not demanding attention. At first glance, it might seem strange that the same girl who was so sensitive to our classmates, who found the strength to support and encourage them, could be so indifferent to the feelings of her fans. However, knowing Jenny better, I understood her. She grew up surrounded by admiration and attention to which she was accustomed from an early age. This became the norm for her, something ordinary and completely natural. She probably didn't even realize that her actions, which seemed insignificant to her, could cause real pain to those who were sincerely attracted to her. The guys who literally lost their minds at her smile or a casual glance, for her remained just another guys eager to go on a date with her. She did not see their suffering because she was not used to thinking about the power that her beauty gave her over people. Perhaps Jenny didn't even consider her behavior to be cruel. Her actions were not intentionally intended to hurt anyone. She simply lived in a world where everything worked out around her without extra effort, and she did not need to make special efforts to earn someone's attention or affection. For her, these young people were part of a familiar picture of life in which she felt comfortable, not realizing that her indifference was leaving an imprint on their hearts. From the very beginning, I decided that I would not allow Jenny to treat me like that. If I manage to get a date, I will make sure that our relationship is based on mutual respect. I wasn't going to make any concessions because of her incredible beauty, and I wanted to treat her like any other woman I like. On the Tuesday before my sociology test, I called Jenny and invited her to dinner on the Friday after the test. To my delight, she agreed, and I arranged to meet her at the hostel at 7:30. But when I arrived, her roommate said Jenny was gone. I waited in the lobby until 8 and then just left. I didn't call, but decided to wait until Monday to see her in class. After the lecture, I slowly walked out of the room, giving her the opportunity to approach me. She smiled warmly and apologized for being late, saying that she was caught up in a conversation with a friend in the library. Then she asked, "But why didn't you wait for me?" "Well, Jenny," I replied calmly, "after half an hour of waiting, I'm hungry. And since I didn't know when you would return, I decided to go out to dinner alone." She seemed a little surprised to realize that she hadn't even thought about how I felt. Then, more sincerely, she said, "Of course you're right. Sorry, Brad." We walked a little more, and she suggested, "Well, shall we try again?" "It depends, Jenny," I replied. She looked at me in surprise. "What do you mean?" "If you come on time, I'll be happy to take you to dinner. But if you're going to be late again, I think I should make other plans." An irritation flashed across her face, but then it was replaced by a wide smile. "Agreed. How about Friday at 7:30? And this time I'll definitely be ready." On Friday, Jenny was really ready, and we had an amazing evening. First of all, she looked amazing. She was dressed simply, a skirt, blouse, and woolen sweater. But even in this, she was amazing. Although I had already seen her several times in our group, I still had a hard time getting used to her beauty and just seeing her as an ordinary girl. But the main thing is that we found a common language. It was an amazing feeling, as if two puzzles had finally connected, fitting perfectly together. Our values, sense of humor, and interests coincide so closely that conversations flowed easily and naturally. We discussed everything from childhood memories to dreams about the future. We told each other funny and sometimes ridiculous stories from the past, laughed until we cried, and felt as if we had known each other not for a few weeks, but for a lifetime. The evening began with slight shyness, but by the middle of dinner, not a trace of it remained. The waiters seemed to slow down every now and then near our table, catching the spark that slipped between us. We ate slowly, without haste, enjoying every minute. Dessert seemed not just the end of the meal, but another reason for conversation, and coffee twice a cup each became almost a ritual, emphasizing our mutual passion. As the clock approached 11 p.m. and the restaurant became noticeably quieter, we realized that we were almost the last ones left. The staff began to subtly hint that closing time was approaching. Someone was removing chairs, someone was wiping down nearby tables, casting friendly glances at us. But we still couldn't bring ourselves to get up. It felt like leaving this place would ruin the magic of the moment. I realized more and more that I was already madly in love with Jenny. Her lightness, her sincere laughter, her ability to listen everything about her captivated me. But I also understood that I had to be careful not to show too much enthusiasm. I didn't want to frighten off this fragile harmony that had just begun to form between us. At parting, I agonized over what to do best. Give her your hand to shake, or dare for a short but meaningful kiss. My heart was racing as I tried to make a decision. However, Jenny beat me to it. She looked me straight in the eye and said with such sincerity and warmth that I was momentarily speechless, "Brad, thank you for this evening. I had a great time." Her words sounded simple, but there was so much genuine joy in them that I felt my resolve to hold back begin to melt. "Me too, Jenny," I replied, gathering all my thoughts to express how I felt. In 3 years at the university, I have never met a person with whom I felt so comfortable. You are wonderful. I said this, hoping that my words would not sound too serious or too insistent. But in her eyes, illuminated by the soft light of the street lamps, I noticed understanding and something else, perhaps the same sincere sympathy that I felt. We stood in front of the restaurant for a few more moments, delaying the moment of farewell. The autumn air was fresh and light, and I thought it was a perfect evening that I would like to experience again and again. Encouraged by her words, I leaned in to lightly kiss her on the lips, but she held me back longer than I expected. Her kiss was delicious, and I could hardly contain my satisfied sigh when we pulled away. I was ready to wish her good night and leave, but to my happiness I heard, "I would like to return the invitation to you. How about brunch on Sunday?" "It's my pleasure. What should I bring? Maybe something for dessert." "That would be great. Come at 12. And bring your sociology textbooks. We'll at least pretend that we're going to study." She laughed. When I returned to my hostel, I was happier than ever. Jenny seemed really interested in me, and I was crazy about her. However, I reminded myself of my decision to be careful and not let her walk all over me. A few weeks later, we were already dating seriously. Of course, her beauty continued to fascinate me, but she wasn't the only one. Her intelligence, sense of humor, and kindness captivated me no less. We decided not to reveal our relationship to other members of the group, so we kept a very low profile. After a couple of weeks, when our dates ended with increasingly passionate kisses, I finally asked directly if she wanted to stay with me for the night. I was lucky that I lived alone in the room. She smiled and said, "I've been waiting for you to talk about this." After a relaxing evening at the movies, we headed back to my room. I suddenly felt a little nervous, but not because of the sex itself. I already had a serious relationship and a lot of experience, so I wasn't afraid of appearing inept. I was more concerned about the meaning of this moment for the two of us. As we sat on the couch, hugging each other and kissing softly, Jenny looked at me with a look that clearly said, "Time for bed." "Jenny," I said, "can I say something before we continue?" She nodded in surprise. "You can probably guess how much I look forward to this hugging you all night, and everything else. But this is an important moment for me, and I have to say something." She looked at me carefully without interrupting. We never talked about what our relationship meant to us. So far, everything has been easy and fun. But I want to know what you think. For me, intimacy with you is not just a random event. This means that you are the only woman in my life while we are together, and I want to make sure you feel the same. A soft smile appeared on Jenny's face. "I feel the same way, Brad. I've dated other people a couple of times, but it hasn't been fun lately. I think I did it out of habit. But now I'm more than ready to be only yours, if that's what you want." I hugged her, feeling joy and relief. "I want you, Jenny. Very, very strong." I picked her up and carried her to the bed. That night, Jenny slept peacefully in my arms. In the morning, we took a shower together and made love again, enjoying every moment of intimacy. From then on, we became almost inseparable, as far as our activities allowed. We made love whenever we found the opportunity, and every moment spent with Jenny felt special. Even little things, like the way she ate yogurt while gently licking the spoon, brought me joy. As our relationship became more serious, we began to discuss the future. Although we didn't directly talk about being together forever, it was clear that we were serious about each other. I planned to work in business after graduation, probably moving back to Missouri where I'm from. Jenny had not yet decided on a career, but wanted a job that would allow her to work with people and have a flexible schedule. I already began to think about proposing to her, but I understood that it was too early for this. We both still needed to finish our studies. Our first serious argument occurred in the spring, when we were discussing plans for the summer holidays. I was required to do an internship with a company in St. Louis that could lead to a good job offer after graduation. Jenny promised her parents that she would return home to Pennsylvania and work there as a secretary in a law office, as she did every summer. The question was, will we maintain our exclusive long-distance relationship for 3 months? I insisted on yes, but Jenny thought otherwise. We started arguing. "I'm not talking about sleeping with anyone, Brad," she said. "But why should I sit at home every night when I could go out with someone just for fun to watch a movie or go to a party? Isn't our relationship important enough to you to sacrifice fun for it?" I answered irritably. The argument continued, and we both became increasingly irritated. Finally, Jenny found an argument that I found difficult to argue with. "Okay, Brad, let's do it this way. If I promise that I will only go out with my friends to go to the cinema, to dinner, or to parties, will that be okay with you?" Without hesitation, I answered, "Yes." "Then why can't you go with male friends? As long as I give you an honest promise. No kissing, no hugging, no sex. Just friendship." She looked at me, and I reluctantly conceded. "Okay, Jenny, you're right. I love you and trust you." Jenny smiled and kissed me. "You can trust me, Brad. I love you, and I promise I won't do anything to upset you. I will act as if you are always there." "Okay, love. But I want to say something else. You are not just an ordinary woman. You are extraordinarily beautiful. There is not a single man who would not want to be with you." Jenny smiled brightly. Of course, she knew this, but she always listened to such words with pleasure. "That means you have to be extra careful, okay? Think over your actions and don't give anyone a reason to think differently about you." She smiled again, now almost with regret, which offended me a little. "Trust me, Brad, I've dealt with male attention for a long time. It won't be a problem." Then, seeing that I was still a little worried, she sat on my lap, hugged me, and said, "I love you, Brad. Do you want me to repeat it? I love only you, I'm all yours." The only thing I could do was kiss her, hug her, and make love. This was the best way to end the argument. The summer was difficult, but it passed faster than I expected. Working days in St. Louis were busy and sometimes grueling. I got an internship at a large company that serviced restaurants and hotels. This was the same job that required full dedication, but promised to provide valuable experience and the opportunity to feel like part of a serious business. Every day started early and ended late, and although I sometimes felt exhausted, I still knew that these efforts would pay off. Despite my busy schedule, I managed to find time to visit Jenny twice. Each trip seemed like a small holiday among a series of everyday work. I stayed with her parents, who, fortunately, received me with friendly interest. They did not show a shadow of dissatisfaction with my presence. On the contrary, they showed cordiality and goodwill. Her mother always greeted me with a warm smile and always offered me a delicious home-cooked meal, and her father, although a little reserved, asked questions about my plans and work with visible respect. Nevertheless, they persistently allocated me a guest room, which, of course, is not surprising. One could hardly expect a different decision from the parents who protected their daughter. I understood this immediately and did not mind. On the contrary, I even felt some relief. This solution helped me avoid awkwardness or complicated explanations. Our meetings with Jenny during these short visits were filled with joy and lightness. We walked around the neighborhood, laughed, told each other the news, and seemed not to notice how quickly time flew. I saw how relaxed she was at home, how her genuine energy and easy humor attracted everyone around her. She was the same Jenny I fell in love with, kind, witty, easy to talk to. Every time I left her house, I felt that some kind of invisible but strong connection arose between us, despite the distance and my busy work routine. Summer ended as quickly as it began, but it remains in my memory not only as a period of intense work, but also as a time when I understood more and more how much it meant to me. During both visits, we were able to find only one short moment of intimacy. The rest of the time, we sneaked kisses whenever possible. The rest of the time, we relied on phone calls. I tried to give her pleasant surprises, sending cute cards with the words, "thinking of you," or sending a large box containing just one Hershey's Kiss chocolate bar. I once sent her a fake letter from the IRS saying she owed $90,000 in taxes for last year. Jenny found it extremely funny and even showed the letter to her parents. The following fall, my senior year at Penn State, Jenny and I more than made up for our summer breakup. I had a small apartment off campus where Jenny practically lived with me, so we could make love whenever we wanted. Our relationship got better and better, and I was sure that I had found the woman of my life. In April, I proposed to her, and she happily agreed, asking only to postpone the wedding for another year until she graduated. Parents on both sides were very happy when they heard our news. First, however, we had to endure a year of separation. Jenny was in her final year of university, and I was working in food service in St. Louis. She came to see me 3 times during the holidays and long weekends, and I went to see her at least once every 2 months. There was only one really bad moment this year. One evening in February, I arrived at the university an hour earlier than planned and hurried to Jenny's room. Her roommate said she was somewhere in the cafe at the student center. As I entered the crowded room, I looked around and saw Jenny at a small table in the far corner. She was sitting with a tall, handsome man who appeared to be in his 30s. He looked like a teacher. I was about to approach her, but something in their poses stopped me. There was a little more intimacy between them than I would have liked, so I sat at a table 12 meters away, out of their sight, but so that they could not miss me if they decided to leave. I wanted to know more. There was nothing obviously inappropriate about their behavior. They were talking, laughing, and drinking coffee. But their heads were too close to each other, and my instinct told me that something was wrong. After a while, the man reached out to Jenny's hands and squeezed them tightly, continuing to seriously tell her something. She laughed and pulled her hands away, but he continued to look into her eyes and talk until he took her hands again. This time she didn't resist, letting him hold them in his hands. After a few more minutes, Jenny looked at her watch and apparently said that she had to go. She removed her hands and stood up. I watched closely as they said goodbye, but there was no kissing or other intimacy. and they did not seem to have agreed to meet again. As Jenny headed out, she noticed me at the table. Her smile froze, and she almost stopped. Then she pulled herself together and ran to me. "Hi, darling. You're so early. I've learned throughout my life to keep my cool when I'm upset. I think it has something to do with the fact that my father taught me boxing as a child. He was an excellent amateur boxer and trained seriously with me for several years. I even competed in Golden Gloves tournaments, although I didn't do that anymore after high school. My main sport was lacrosse, where, despite my small height of about 175 centimeters, I was twice selected to the district team. Boxing training taught me to remain calm in difficult situations, not to panic, and not to let my emotions take over. This quality has become very valuable both in personal life and in business. When Jenny approached me, I was filled with anger and jealousy, as well as doubts about her fidelity. But instead of attacking her with reproaches, I simply said, "Hello, Jenny." She hugged me and kissed me, but I didn't even get up from my seat. Jenny sat down opposite her and began to talk quickly and nervously. How difficult the week had been, how glad she was to see me, how it happened that I arrived so early, and so on. She didn't seem to know how much I had seen and didn't understand how to handle the situation. My silence clearly bothered her. Finally, she stopped and asked, "Honey, are you okay?" I just looked at her and said quietly, "Jenny, maybe you have something to tell me. I realized a long time ago that it is better to wait until the other person starts making excuses than to immediately show your cards." I was angry and wanted Jenny to worry, not realizing how much I knew. "Have you seen me with this guy?" she asked, blushing. I didn't answer. I just continued to watch. Finally, she continued, "His name is Jamie Atherton. He is my English literature professor. He suggested meeting for coffee to discuss my latest work. I wrote an essay on Dickens that he really liked and wanted to encourage me to develop it and possibly publish it. Really, Brad, that's just the point." I continued to remain silent, and she looked increasingly worried. Finally, I said, "Why don't we go for a walk?" We dressed warmly and walked towards her hostel, and not towards the hotel where I usually stayed when I arrived. I didn't talk to her or take her hand, I just walked quickly forward, so she had to make an effort to keep up. As we approached her dorm, she said anxiously, "Please, Brad, won't you talk to me?" I was so looking forward to our meeting. I just answered, "I'll call you in the morning, Jenny. Maybe we can have breakfast and talk then. I need to think, and maybe you do too." I quickly kissed her on the cheek and walked away. I heard her shout in a trembling voice, "Brad, honey, please wait." But she didn't follow me. This night was hard for me. I thought a lot and hardly slept. What did I actually see? The man who tried to court Jenny, and the fact that she let him go a little further than I would have liked. He didn't kiss her, and their body language gave no reason to think that they were sleeping together. On the other hand, she did not withdraw her hands when he took them the second time, and she was obviously not embarrassed by his advances. I knew that Jenny was used to the admiration of men. I couldn't blame them for finding her attractive, or for trying to win her over in my absence. But she was my bride, wearing my ring, and I didn't like that she let this man get that far. Jenny called me at 8 a.m., asking in a trembling voice if we could have breakfast together. When I met her in front of the dorm, she threw herself on my neck and started sobbing. "Brad, please, honey, talk to me. I know you're angry. I know I was wrong, but really, it was just a little bit. Please, please let me explain everything." She continued to cry, and I held her in my arms, internally pleased and relieved by her reaction. I needed her to feel guilty, for her to tell me everything, and for me to understand that it really wasn't as bad as I feared. "Okay, Jenny," I said, calming her down and stroking her hair. I took out a handkerchief and wiped her wet cheeks. "Let's sit down, have breakfast, and talk." She held my hand the entire way to the restaurant and insisted on sitting next to me in the booth so she could continue to hold on to me. As soon as we ordered, she started saying, "Honey, what I said yesterday is true. He really is my professor, and he really wanted to talk about my essay. This was the only time I met him outside of the classroom. But, but that's not the whole truth. I knew he was interested in me, that if it had been some other student's essay, he wouldn't have asked her out for coffee. It just seemed harmless, that's all. I was pleased by his attention, and I knew that nothing would happen. We were sitting in the middle of the student center, in full view of everyone, so I just drank coffee and listened to him admire my talents. Honestly, Brad, I knew I'd see you in an hour, and it was just something to do to pass the time. And then at the end, she looked up at me. I don't know if you saw this, but he started talking about how beautiful I was, and he took my hands. I nodded to show that I saw it. I pulled my hands away, but a minute later he took them again, and I just let him. I thought it would be too cutesy to rip them out again, so I let him say nice things about how wonderful I am and stuff like that. And then I looked at my watch and saw that it was almost time to go see you, and this became a great excuse to leave. I swear to you, honey, this is it. I said goodbye to him and headed towards the exit when I noticed you, and you looked so calm, so silent, you scared me. I heard enough to feel much better. I gently hugged Jenny and kissed her. I was very upset, Jenny, but now I feel better. Thank you for telling me everything. She looked incredibly relieved, and I realized how much she was afraid of my reaction. I can understand that it was an innocent flirtation, and it didn't go too far. But it was still a little over the top, don't you agree? I looked at her seriously, and she nodded, biting her lip. Yes, Brad. I shouldn't have let him hold my hands. I'm sorry, very sorry. With peace restored between us, we continued breakfast, discussing the events of the past weeks. However, as I headed back to the hotel, I raised the issue again. Jenny, remember how we discussed your meetings with guys at home before last summer? You then promised me that you would always act as if I were next to you in the same room. She nodded, clearly understanding what I wanted to say, but I surprised her by simply adding, it was a good promise. She pressed herself tightly against me there, right on the street. I understand, honey. I'm really sorry, and we will never discuss this again. And then, pulling back to look me in the eyes, she smiled and said, maybe we can go back to your room. There is something that I really missed. Once again, sex after a quarrel was the perfect end to the conflict. The first few years of our marriage were incredibly happy. We got married 2 weeks after her graduation in her parents' garden, went on a 10-day honeymoon to Maui, paid for by my parents, and settled into a small house in the St. Louis suburbs. I was doing great at my job in the food service industry, and after a few months of decorating our home, Jenny decided to get her realtor license and start selling real estate. 6 months after she joined a local real estate agency, Jenny became the third best salesperson in the company. This did not surprise me. She was so beautiful that clients, especially men, were happy to work with her. When she suggested that sellers lower their prices a little or buyers increase their budget a little, people readily followed her recommendations. She quickly began showing and selling as many homes as the company's most experienced employees. Our life together was a real joy. Jenny remained as lively, cheerful, and affectionate as I loved her. We had a great group of friends, mostly from her work and mine, and we spent just enough time together to make our time together special. Sex with Jenny was always pleasant and warm, although not too violent. She valued intimacy and closeness in sex more than experimentation. In other words, the physical pleasure of sex meant less to her than the emotional connection. She was a bit conservative, partly due to her upbringing. Jenny never swore and was embarrassed when I did it, so I almost completely stopped, and even in bed avoided frank conversations. The most she was capable of happened one day on our honeymoon. We drank a lot of champagne, and when I climbed into bed with her, she blurted out with a smile, "Make love to me, husband." Then she laughed for a long time, rejoicing at her own courage. In later years, she would sometimes whisper to me something like, "Make love to me," knowing that it turned me on, but it didn't come naturally to her. Jenny simply wasn't particularly open sexually and wasn't eager to experiment. Although this meant that she rarely took the initiative, and unexpected moments like meeting me naked in the kitchen or suggesting we make love under the stars in the backyard were rare. We still made love regularly and with great pleasure. For us, it was not only physical intimacy, all this became priceless to me. I realized early in the relationship how much Jenny liked surprises, so I tried to please her from time to time, either with flowers for no reason or with an unexpected visit to her office with chocolate ice cream. A couple of times she came home from work to find me in a tuxedo, having a candlelit dinner and ready for a romantic evening. One day, for her birthday in the second year of our marriage, I threw her a surprise party, inviting our parents and a dozen of her college friends. I sent her to the shopping center in the morning on some errand, and when she returned, we were all already waiting for her in the garden. There were balloons, a banner, "Happy Birthday," and an excellent catering menu. She was delighted. To be honest, I did all this not only out of love, but also out of concern. Jenny was used to constant attention from men, and I didn't want her to miss it after she got married. One of the ironies of living with a beautiful woman is that over time her beauty becomes familiar to you. You notice it less than people who see it for the first time. I continued to admire her, but I was no longer as stunned as the others. However, there were moments when I looked at her in absolute amazement. How lucky I am that this extraordinary woman is mine. In the third year of our marriage, we conceived Diana, our daughter, who changed our lives for the better. We both turned out to be great parents, despite the sleepless nights and constant worry about whether we were doing everything right. Jenny worked hard to get back into shape, and 6 months after Diana was born, she was back working as a realtor 2 days a week, while Diana was looked after by an elderly Irish woman who lived nearby. When Diana turned 3, I left my job, took out a bank loan, and started my own catering company. I learned everything about how the industry works at a large corporation and was confident that I could work harder, smarter, and succeed on my own. The first 6 months were very difficult. I worked late at the office and sometimes went on business trips, but things began to improve. I found several large clients, enough to support the business and develop it further. I hired my close friend Terry from my previous job as assistant manager. She was a divorced woman, 5 years older than me, who was friends with both me and Jenny. Terry was pretty, although certainly not like Jenny, who could be like her, and very smart, and I also knew that you could completely rely on her. Everything was going well, and it seemed to me that the whole world was at my feet, until I realized that the opposite is true. One Thursday afternoon, I was in the kitchen of the Commonwealth Hotel restaurant, discussing the possibility of bringing the manager among my clients. The meeting went well, and I hoped that he would call me next week to sign the agreement. We went out into the lobby to say goodbye, and at that moment he suddenly fell silent and looked behind me, exclaiming, "Lord, what a beautiful woman!" I turned around and saw someone who truly amazed me with her beauty. She was a slender blonde in an elegant suit and blue silk blouse. She was the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. It was my wife. She walked arm in arm with a tall, distinguished man in his 40s. A moment later, I recognized him. It was Marlon Anderson, the loan officer from the bank that gave me the startup loan for my business. They headed towards the elevator, chatting animatedly, while the manager and I watched them in silence. They didn't notice us. When the elevator doors opened, they stepped inside, and before the doors closed, I saw Anderson pull Jenny towards him and kiss her. I almost threw up, but I kept my cool. The restaurant manager said, "Wow, what a beauty. Looks like he's in for a pleasant evening." Of course, he didn't know it was my wife. I just replied, "Yes, she's really amazing," and we said goodbye. As I said before, I am able to remain calm and plan in times of extreme emotional stress. This case fits this description perfectly. I sat down on a bench in front of the hotel to calmly think about what to do. It was about 14:45. I knew they would be in the room for at least an hour who wouldn't want that kind of time with Jenny, and also knew that she would have to leave the hotel no later than 16:30 to pick up Diana from kindergarten. After careful consideration, I began to prepare. I had a snack at a diner, then bought a large bouquet of flowers and a white jacket that looked like a courier's uniform. Returning to the hotel, I walked up to the counter and asked for Marlon Anderson's number. The tired receptionist glanced at the flowers and said indifferently, 617. I went up to the 8th floor, left flowers at the door of one of the rooms, took off my jacket, and went down to the 6th floor. There I stood around the corner in the corridor, from where I could see the door to room 617, but I remained invisible. As I stood there, I remembered our first meeting with Anderson. I took Jenny with me to the bank for a meeting, knowing the impression she usually made on people. And of course, he was amazed. Anderson was a tall, handsome man, reminiscent of the typical senator from the movies. He was always perfectly dressed, with a hint of gray in his black hair slicked back and a skillful but forced smile. When he met me at the door of his office, he said, "Mr. Hollywell, nice to meet you. Marlon Anderson," with an O, not like a fish. I was sure he had said this phrase 1,000 times already. He then noticed Jenny, and his eyes visibly widened. He literally devoured her with his gaze. I saw this many times from other men. "Mr. Anderson, this is my wife, Jenny." "It's very nice to meet you, Mrs. Hollywell," he said, turning on all his charm. Then, turning to me, "Mr. Hollywell, you have a wonderful wife." He gave me the loan quite easily. My proposal was impeccably prepared, but to be honest, its decision seemed to depend more on Jenny than on my business plan. I haven't heard from him since then until about 10 days ago when he called out of the blue to supposedly find out how I was doing. He asked several questions and, as I now remembered, asked how often I went on business trips. I mentioned that I was going to Chicago this weekend. Now, standing in the hotel hallway, I put two and two together. Now I realized that Anderson was simply finding out when I would be away so that he could find time to meet my wife in person. If I'm right, then today's incident at the hotel was far from their first date. The kiss in the elevator was nothing like the first attempt at courtship. He probably met her last weekend while I was in Chicago. I dialed his home phone number. When the woman answered, I asked, "Hello, can I speak to Mr. Marlon Anderson?" She replied, "My husband is at the bank now. Leave a message for him." "No, thanks," I replied. "I tried to contact him there, but he was not there. I'll call you later." I hung up, saving the number for redial. The corridor was quiet. No one left the rooms or walked past. Until around 16:10, I heard the sound of the door opening. I looked around the corner and saw that the door to room 617 was open. Jenny and Anderson came out. They were fully dressed, but stopped to kiss goodbye. He hugged her tightly around the waist, leaning towards her face. They then smiled at each other and headed towards the elevator. I came around the corner and took a few steps forward, waiting for them to notice me. Jenny saw me first. She froze in place in complete shock, her face turning pale. "Brad, what? You? Wait, I can explain everything. It's not what you think." "Jenny," I said quietly, "do me a favor and don't insult my intelligence, okay?" I was about to turn around and leave, but Anderson grabbed me by the shoulder to turn me back. His face expressed a mixture of embarrassment, self-satisfaction, and some kind of cloying friendliness. "Brad," he began in his pompous tone, "your wife is an extraordinary woman. I'm sure you understand how." I didn't let him finish. Up to this point, I had not yet decided what to do with Anderson, but his self-confidence and insincerity made the choice for me. I hit him, and Jenny retreated in fear. I turned and calmly walked towards the fire escape. I already knew what I would do next. I took a taxi and quickly returned home. Knowing that I had some time before Jenny returned, I packed up my things for a few days, grabbed my laptop, some important work documents, and again called a taxi to go to the Marriott Hotel located near my office. On the way there, I pressed redial and was soon speaking with Mrs. Anderson again. "Hello, Mrs. Anderson. I'm very sorry to tell you bad news. I just caught your husband leaving room 617 at the Commonwealth Hotel with my wife. They stayed there for about an hour and a half. If you call the reception, you can see for yourself that your husband has reserved this room." I heard her gasp and ask, "Who is this?" I continued, When you see your husband tonight, his face will be in pretty bad shape. I'm afraid I broke his nose. I'm sure he'll have an interesting story for you, but the truth is that I caught him leaving the hotel room with my wife and need him. I'm sorry to tell you this way, but I think you should know the truth about the man you married. Good luck." I hung up, turned off the phone, and leaned back in the taxi seat. I had one urgent matter left, but it could wait until morning. In my room, I unpacked my things, ordered a sandwich and 3 bottles of beer through room service, and then lay down on the bed. The adrenaline that had kept me going for hours, helping me act calmly and decisively, suddenly disappeared, and I burst into tears. At that moment, I felt the way any unsuspecting husband probably feels when his world suddenly collapses. It was a blow, completely unexpected and deafening, which knocked the ground out from under our feet. I always thought our marriage was strong, based on love, understanding, and trust. I believed that we were happy together, that she felt for me the same deep affection and adoration that I felt for her. These thoughts, which previously seemed unshakable, suddenly began to crumble. I couldn't imagine why she would want to cheat on me. What was she missing? I racked my brain trying to find an answer, but every option seemed impossible to me, especially with this slippery guy who only caused me irritation and contempt. However, he was not the main one in this situation. His personality, whatever its qualities, meant the least to me. I focused on something else myself. What's wrong with me? What mistakes did I make? What didn't I give her? These questions tormented me, forcing me to analyze our relationship, our conversations, our days together again and again. How could I fail to meet her needs? Or is this not about me at all? Maybe the problem is deeper than I could imagine. These thoughts led to more painful questions. Maybe I was just mistaken in its essence. Could it be that my wife, whom I loved and protected so much, was actually the cold, selfish, and unfeeling woman I had only imagined in my head? It was as if the image of her that I cherished was an illusion of my own making. I remembered moments from our past, trying to find clues or signs that I had not noticed before. But the more I thought, the stronger the feeling of emptiness and powerlessness grew. It was unbearable. Pain permeated every thought, as if I was again and again faced with something inevitable that turned my life upside down. I stopped crying and thought, resting my chin on my hands when my dinner arrived. Beer didn't help. I just felt a slight cloudiness in my head, but it didn't make me feel any better. I called my friend Terry and asked her to come. When she arrived, I immediately told her everything. Terry looked truly shocked. She knew Jenny well, and there was no hint of anything other than horror and disappointment on her face. This comforted me a little at least. I didn't miss any obvious signs that even our friends could see. After listening to the whole story, she just sighed. God, Brad, I have to say, you were the last person in the world from whom I expected to hear such a story. I'm so sorry. I think if anyone else had seen it, I simply wouldn't have believed it. A minute later, she asked, "What are you going to do?" Damn, Terry, I have no idea. I'll probably talk to her. But not right away. Let him suffer, right? I smiled bitterly. Anyway, I'm so angry and upset that I don't even know what I'm feeling. I still love her, and I want to break her neck. I want to be with her, and I won't be able to trust her for more than 30 seconds. How can I live with this? We have a daughter, without whom I cannot live. I know that for sure. Even for her sake alone, I'll probably try to understand if it's possible to somehow fix all this. Maybe I'm finally learning from my mistakes. People say, never marry a beautiful woman, but I married the most beautiful woman we have ever seen. So maybe I deserve it. This is nonsense, Brad, and you know it, Terry said firmly. I don't know why Jenny did this, but it's definitely not because she's too beautiful, and it's not because you're not a wonderful, loving husband. At least from my point of view, it's just a mystery to me. You didn't deserve this. We talked for a couple more hours, and then I sent Terry home. What can I do for you? She asked. The main thing is to keep Jenny away from me. I'm sure she'll call work tomorrow. Can you tell Alice and Dawn to tell her I'm not in the office? I want to wait until I'm ready before I see her. Will you be in the office tomorrow? She looked at me carefully. Yeah, I think we're close to finishing a couple of projects, and I need to send letters and make calls. Besides, if I don't work, what will I do then? So yes, I will be there. I just have one thing to do this morning. The next morning, I was at the bank when it opened at 8:30. I asked to see the director of business banking, Anderson's boss. Being persistent and threatening to raise my voice several times, I found myself in Mr. Daniel Greenwood's office by 8:50. I didn't waste time. Mr. Greenwood, I have come to file a formal complaint regarding the misconduct of my loan officer, Marlon Anderson. Not only did he have an affair with my wife, I noticed his eyes narrow, but he also used my business information to promote his affair. I am considering filing a lawsuit against your bank, but decided to give you a chance to deal with this situation first. He hesitated, muttered, and began to talk about the seriousness of the charges and the need to clarify the details. Then I laid out everything: Jenny and I's meeting with Anderson about the loan, his mysterious call asking about my business trips, and most importantly, the fact that I had seen them together the day before. I mentioned a broken nose in passing. When I left his office, I had an almost complete feeling that Anderson's career at this bank was over. Greenwood practically promised that if my story was true, Anderson would be fired for unacceptable behavior. He also seemed resigned to the need for financial compensation for me, and from what he said, it didn't bother him much the bank's insurance company would cover the costs. I'll contact a lawyer later in the day to see how much I can collect. Judging by Greenwood's tone, the amount could be in the region of 6 figures. Anderson was indeed fired. His wife left him, and he found another job in banking in another state. He could, of course, accuse me of assault, but I figured he didn't want to have to explain in court what he was doing. 8 months later, my lawyer happily handed me a check from the bank, $112,000. They immediately went to a college fund for Diana. All that remained was to deal with Jenny. Only, I put this off until Sunday. She left a couple dozen messages on my work and cell phone, but I ignored them. The messages were full of tears and apologies, as well as worries about my condition, and they only made me angrier. Those damned words of love and regret that came too late. In the anonymous hotel room, I played it all over in my head over and over again. What have I missed as a husband? Of course, she knew how much I loved and appreciated her. I gave her many surprises, but were they not enough? Did the routine of family life cause her to feel forgotten, despite my best efforts? Was it about sex? Was Jenny dissatisfied because we weren't doing it often enough or passionately enough? This seemed unlikely to me. She rarely initiated intimacy and always viewed sex as an opportunity for emotional contact rather than a chance for passion. Maybe she was missing something in our rather discreet, intimate life that prompted her to behave like a prostitute with someone else. If so, the gallant and smooth senior banker was hardly a suitable choice. She would have found a truck driver. I couldn't find the reason. Maybe she just wasn't there. I realized that I myself had once been mildly tempted to cheat while in a hotel in Chicago or Cleveland during a business trip, lonely and yearning, looking at an attractive woman at the other end of the bar. But this slight temptation remained only a temptation. I never bought a woman a drink, did not start a conversation, and certainly did not try to have an affair. My sex life with Jenny was a little boring, but it was fulfilling for other reasons. It was intimate and sincere, relaxed, and it was with the person I loved and trusted most in the world, or trusted most of all. I waited until Sunday morning to get home and see Jenny. Normally, we would be in church at this time, but I doubted that she went there with Diana alone. She would have to explain my absence. I arrived home a little after 11 a.m., when Diana was usually asleep. He quietly walked around the house and looked out the kitchen window. Jenny was sitting at the table, a cup of coffee in front of her, and she was looking into space. She looked tired and unhappy. I walked back to the front door and just walked inside. When I walked into the kitchen, she jumped up. She looked like she wanted to run into my arms, but the look on my face must have made her change her mind. In a quiet voice, barely daring to look at me, she began to say, "Brad, thank God you're here. I was so worried. Honey, I'm so sorry for." I interrupted her. raising my hand to stop her. "I'm not going to give you custody of Diana." She gasped and then literally staggered. I thought she might fall. Instead, she sank back into her chair and began to cry. I did this on purpose, of course. Years ago, I had a boxing match against an older, more experienced opponent who expected me to be an easy target. Instead of starting the fight the standard way, dancing around carefully and using the jab to keep him at bay, I attacked right from the start of the fight, landing a hard right hand to the side of the head. This stunned him, and the fight was essentially over at that moment. I took away his confidence. This moment reminded me of that fight. I was furious with Jenny, and so I threw the first blow. But I felt sad almost to tears that I perceived her as an opponent. How did we get to this sad state? I watched Jenny cry with compassion, sadness, love, and rage all mixed up in my head. I still loved her, and it seemed to me that I was a loving and attentive husband. Was I wrong? And if not, how the hell could she do that? Finally, still crying, she looked up at me and asked, "Are we really at this point, Brad? Do you want to divorce me? Will you at least let me talk to you? Does this make sense?" I asked. She cried even harder. "Don't you know that I love you?" She could barely utter words between sobs. "Let's just say my faith has been shaken a little," I answered coldly. "Your behavior the other day was not like the behavior of a wife who loves her husband." "I know I deserve it," she said. "I deserve everything you want to tell me. You can't imagine how low I feel, how ashamed I feel. But please, Brad, please, will you at least listen to me, give me a chance?" I sat silently for a minute. I knew I couldn't ruin our marriage without listening to her, and I didn't really want to destroy our marriage. I wanted to return it to the way it was. But I knew I could never get back what we had, and that made me angry. While I sat and thought, Jenny gradually calmed down, watching me. "Okay," I finally said. "Why don't you wash your face, and I'll make myself a cup of coffee. Then we can sit down and talk." "Thank you, Brad," she almost whispered. Then she got up and left the room. When she returned, I said, "Okay, here are the rules. You tell me the truth and tell me everything. You don't know how much I already know, and if you lie, our marriage will end. In fact, it could end either way. I'm not sure about that yet. But if you don't be completely honest with me, it will all end right here and now." "I understand, Brad. I'll tell you everything. There's really not much to tell." What followed was one of the saddest half hours of my life. The story was so predictable that I felt like a living cliché. When my new business started to take off, I became deeply engrossed in it, working longer hours and spending less time with Jenny and Diana. Jenny was proud of me, but she felt lonely. Given her life experience, she was an incredibly beautiful woman who never lacked attention. This state of affairs greatly depressed her. About 2 months after we first met Marlon Anderson, he called Jenny. He knew about her real estate work and said he wanted to refer potential clients to her. For several months, they spoke from time to time, always purely on business. He did refer her a few clients, for which she was grateful, and was always pleasant and very correct. After she sold a house to one of his clients and received a nice commission, Anderson called to congratulate her and suggested they celebrate over lunch. Jenny, having extensive experience with men who knew how to make unambiguous hints, was on guard, but an afternoon lunch in the city center seemed completely safe to her. Besides, as she admitted to me, she liked him. He was pleasant, and although much older than her, he was a very attractive man. At lunch, Anderson was again absolutely correct. He complimented Jenny a lot, but talked not only about her appearance, but also about her professional skills. However, he unobtrusively started talking about my business trips. He asked if she felt lonely when I was away, and casually noted how often men cheat on their wives during such business trips. By the time this lunch took place, Anderson had already spoken to me and knew that I would be away the following weekend. He called Jenny on Friday and said he heard I wasn't going to be there and invited her to dinner on Saturday night. "My wife is gone too," he lied, "so we can spend the evening as two single spouses." This dinner led to a dance and then to a hotel room that Anderson had reserved in advance. From Jenny's story, it became clear that he was very experienced in such matters. Everything went smoothly, no rude advances, no obvious attempts to start an affair. Just a dinner of champagne and charm, occasional remarks about how I'm probably with another woman right now, and a constant stream of compliments and attention. Jenny honestly admitted two things to me. First, she admitted that alcohol was not the reason she cheated. She was a little tipsy, but fully aware of what she was doing. Secondly, she said that for her, sex was the least important part of it all. As I already mentioned, she was not a passionate woman. She loved the romance, compliments, and attention she received from Anderson at a time when she felt it was missing in our marriage. She admitted that if she could get all this attention without sex, that would be preferable to her. But she knew how desirable she was and understood that for a man, a romantic evening inevitably ends with nightly intimacy. While Jenny was telling her story in an even voice, I couldn't sit still and started pacing back and forth in the kitchen. Having sex with him was nothing special, Brad. He's no better than you, in that sense, and he turned out to be not such a wonderful lover, not as gentle as you. It wasn't something big for me, but I saw how excited he was, and we did it twice that night. He wanted me to stay with him all night, but I needed to go home to the nanny. It was last Saturday, and the second time was at the Commonwealth Hotel on Thursday when you saw us. He invited me to a long lunch, but I knew what he meant. I'm trying really hard to be honest with you, Brad. For me, the pleasure of time with Marlon was in the romance, in the attention he showed me at dinner, in his glances and compliments. Sex was even less pleasant than the first time. We rested, and when he wanted to continue, I said that I needed to pick up Diana. We were just leaving the hotel room when you saw us. How did you know we were there? I was with a client and saw the two of you enter the elevator, I said in a tense voice. I was beside myself with anger and pain. My fists were clenching and I couldn't stop walking. But I didn't want to lose my temper. I knew that only by staying cool would I be able to hear how she really felt. So what do you want now, Jenny? Do you love him? Oh my God, no, Brad. How can you think like that? I resisted the urge to say, you know, honey, the fact that you slept with him might have given me that idea. Instead, I simply asked, then what do you want? She looked me straight in the eyes. I want you back. I want our marriage back. I want to do whatever you say to fix this terrible, stupid thing I did, and I want you to come home. She began to cry again. I want to beg you, crawl in front of you, ask for forgiveness. I want to love you and surround you with care. She was now sobbing, barely speaking through her tears. And I want you to forgive me, love me again, hug me. I want our lives back, Brad. An unstable mixture of love and anger, tenderness and pain shifted inside me. I knew this shift was temporary, but I let it control me. I stood up, walked over to her from the other side of the table, and pulled her close to me. I hugged her and began to rub her back as she sobbed, burying her head in my shoulder and soaking my shirt with tears. I stood silently for a few minutes as she gradually calmed down, still hugging me tightly. When she stopped shaking, I gently pulled away from her and looked into her eyes. I was about to say something when we both heard Diana crying. She had woken up from her nap. We smiled at each other automatically. Then I said, why don't you go get our big girl and bring her here? We'll give her lunch and then continue our conversation. Lunch with Diana was a nice break for both of us. She was delighted to see me. I had not been home for 3 days, and we played and laughed in the kitchen while we ate. Then Diana wanted to go outside to play, but we let her watch a cartoon so that Jenny and I would have some time to talk. When we were alone, I said, I don't know what will happen next, Jenny. All I know is that I still love you. But I also know that part of me wants to kill you. I'm so angry and hurt. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. She looked at me sadly, but didn't say anything. I continued, I'm ready to give this a couple of months. I really miss Diana, so I'll go back home, but I'll sleep in the guest room. You can keep our big bed so you can remember every night why you were alone in it. And we need to go to a family psychologist. Perhaps this will help us both understand why all this happened. and find out if there is anything left between us to get through this. Looking at me seriously, Jenny said, "Thank you, Brad. If you need time to figure out what you want, just remember that I already know what I want. I want you, Diana, and our loving home. I know that it was I who destroyed everything, and that I will have to fix everything, and I will try my best." Her voice trembled, but this time she held back her tears. I can't say that Barbara McDonald saved our marriage, but perhaps we couldn't have done it without her. From the very beginning of our first session, she impressed me. A slightly plump, dark-haired woman in her early 30s, she immediately seemed intelligent and had a sense of humor. It was clear that she would not waste time on empty talk. We explained to her why we came, and she asked a couple of general questions. Then she said, "I'll mostly listen to both of you first. In a month or so, I'll probably have a clearer idea of what to focus on. At first, 2 sessions per week are needed later. If it is appropriate, we can meet less often. Do you have any questions for me at this stage?" "Actually, I have two," I said. "First of all, do you like men?" She looked a little surprised, but then smiled. "This is a rather personal question. Why are you asking?" "Because my wife is very beautiful. Since I've known her, I've seen how her appearance affects men. They lose their common sense and start treating her differently. That's why I insisted on a female consultant, and that's why I'm asking if you're of a traditional orientation." She nodded. "I understand, Brad. Yes, I am traditional." "Thank you. Here's my second question. Several people who have gone through similar counseling have told me, no matter who is at fault, by the end of therapy, you will both be 50% at fault. This is true?" She laughed, clearly enjoying the question. "There is some truth in this, but it is greatly exaggerated. My experience and professional training tell me that if two people are truly happily married, neither of them will cheat. So, since Jenny cheated," she said quite calmly, "it is logical to assume that you have some problems that you may not be aware of. But this does not mean that the blame is divided in half, as you put it. Cheating is destructive, and Jenny must take responsibility for it. But probably at some point, Brad, I will ask you to think about your behavior in your marriage." "Fair enough," I said. "Thank you, Barbara." Our work with Barbara lasted 14 months. The first sessions were very emotional. We talked about the past, about our marriage, and about Jenny's betrayal. Jenny felt enormous guilt, but she also almost didn't understand why she got involved in an affair with Anderson in the first place. I was full of anger and resentment, and also did not understand why this happened. What I wanted most was our old marriage, full of love and trust, and it took me a long time to accept the fact that I could never get that back. It was a vessel broken into millions of pieces. It was simply impossible to glue it together. Instead, we needed to build something new. After a few weeks, Barbara began to bring to our attention what she believed was a key problem in our marriage. We discussed this many times, and gradually the meaning became clearer to both of us. In short, Jenny has always needed an unusual amount of attention, especially from men. She grew up with it, it was part of her life, and she got used to it. The dissatisfaction and anxiety that made her an easy target for Marlon Anderson arose because, at some point in our marriage, she began to lack attention from me. Barbara emphasized that this is not a moral issue on either side. "Brad, no one could say that you really neglected Jenny. According to your stories, you continued to be an attentive and loving husband, supported her emotionally, were available for communication, and so on. But your attention level has dropped a little, and for Jenny, this has been significant. She was used to a certain amount of attention, and when it diminished, she felt abandoned. On the other hand, the fact that Jenny's need for attention, and above all for confirmation of the feeling that she is loved, is unusually high, is also not a moral flaw. People differ in their appetites and needs for many things. Some people eat a lot of sweets, some eat very little. Some people have a high sex drive and want or need sex almost every day, while others are perfectly happy with sex once a month. The need for attention and love also varies. There are people who constantly need to hear, "I love you," or receive praise and gratitude for their actions. And there are those who say, I know she loves me, she doesn't need to say it, and sincerely believe it. So there are two questions here, and we should try to separate them. Firstly, of course, Jenny's affair was a deeply painful mistake, which she herself understands very well. Jenny, you could have expressed to Braid your emotional need for more demonstration of his love in other ways. The choice you made to seek validation and attention outside of your marriage was the wrong one, and you are both still paying for it. But Brad, the second issue is that Jenny's basic need for attention and love is very high. You obviously love her, and I hope that as time passes and your anger over her affair subsides, you will remember that need. I can't recount everything we talked about over 14 months, but this was at the core of it all. Jenny needs a lot of attention, a lot of love. Surprisingly, the topic of sex did not arise often in our work with Barbara. It quickly became clear to her that Jenny's affair had nothing to do with her sexual dissatisfaction or any desire to experiment. Sex was what Anderson wanted, the natural end to all flattering words and charm, and she gave him what he wanted without much pleasure. Knowing this made it a little easier for me to let go of my anger. One of the other things I learned from Barbara was how I responded to cheating. As she put it, Brad, you can't control what Jenny did, but you can control how you react to it. What's done is done, she betrayed your trust, and that's serious. But you decide whether you will forever hold a grudge or let it go. You can allow your anger and pain to overshadow the love you clearly feel for Jenny, or you can try to let love control your behavior more than anger. It was hard to accept. I realized that I was holding on to my anger because I didn't want to accept that my old marriage was gone forever. Somehow the anger maintained the illusion that I could get back what I had lost. Once I realized this, accepting what happened became the only reasonable choice. In one of the first sessions, I practically demanded that Jenny tell me all the sexual details of her two encounters with Anderson. To my surprise, Barbara interrupted me. Brad, I don't think this is a good idea. Jenny admitted what she did, and you know the basics. I don't see how knowing the details will benefit both of you. Moreover, it will likely increase your anger and prolong its subsidence. I didn't immediately agree, but after thinking about it, I realized that Barbara was probably right, and I didn't ask any more. The fact that Jenny didn't enjoy sex with Anderson helped somewhat. And another aspect of my work with Barbara was supportive. In several early sessions, I talked about how hurt I was over Jenny's betrayal and cried a lot. This was a shock to Jenny, who rarely saw me cry. When she listened to me talk about my pain, anger, and despair at losing something irreplaceable in our marriage, it made a deep impression on her. Seeing how deeply I was hurt, she could not avoid realizing the consequences of her actions. I continued to sleep in the guest room for about a month, and then one night, without any plan, I got up, walked down the hall, and got into bed next to Jenny. The lights were off, but she was still awake. Brad, oh honey, I stopped her. It's okay, let's not talk. I was afraid that she would accidentally say something that would make me angry again. So I just extended my arms to her, and she moved closer to me, hugged me, and put her head on my shoulder. I felt the strangest mixture of pain and complete bliss. They fought each other for some time, but bliss won. We fell asleep in each other's arms. Strange, but after that I did not immediately return to our bedroom. Many nights I continued to sleep in the guest room, sometimes returning to hug Jenny, sometimes staying away. She was wise enough not to put pressure on me. She was always happy when I went to bed with her. But she was silent and waited patiently on those nights when I did not come. I seemed to be living through my own drama of reconciliation, with many ebbs and flows of feelings. Almost 3 months passed before we made love again. By that time, I already wanted her badly, although this feeling came and went. But it seemed to me that there was no need to rush into sex with Jenny. I was afraid that the pain and anger would flare up again, which would lead to a very unpleasant scene. When I felt ready, I turned the evening into a surprise, a form of attention that Jenny had always loved. On Friday evening, she returned from work and found a note on the kitchen table. Today, we are going to dinner. Please dress for a fine dining experience and be ready by 8 p.m. your gentleman. I arranged for the nanny to arrive at 7:30 p.m., and at exactly 8 p.m. I showed up at the front door. I took my good suit with me to work and changed there. I had a bouquet in my hands for Jenny, as if it was a real romantic evening. She greeted me with a big smile, looking absolutely adorable. She wore a maroon velvet dress that showed off her slender figure, and her hair was styled just the way I like it. Her eyes sparkled with joy. She may not have known what I had planned, but she clearly knew that the evening would be special. We had a great time at the best Italian restaurant in St. Louis, with a glass of wine that enhanced the pleasure without making us drunk. I knew that she was wondering what this evening meant, but I answered a couple of cautious questions with a smile. "You'll find out," and she realized that she needed to be patient. When we returned home, I paid the nanny and we looked at the sleeping Diana. Then I took the packed box out of the closet and handed it to Jenny. "Jenny, please take this with you to the bathroom and get ready for bed. I'll be waiting for you in the bedroom in 10 minutes. She looked at me with shining eyes, kissed me, and hurried upstairs. 10 minutes later, I was in bed, naked, with the lights dimmed, when she came out of the bathroom. Her golden hair was down, falling over her shoulders, and she was wearing a very sexy lavender nightie that I bought for her. Now she knew exactly what kind of surprise I had prepared. It may seem strange that I put so much effort into our first sexual evening after such a long break, as if it were my fault and trying to atone for my guilt. Shouldn't I have continued to be angry and make her suffer for every word I said? The answer is that Barbara's words really hit home. I actually had a choice in how I dealt with my anger, and letting go seemed like the best way to find happiness again. Moreover, I realized that one of the worst parts of cheating was how passive I felt as a victim. By organizing this romantic evening for Jenny and me, I took an active step, a positive step that allowed us to move past the pain of her betrayal. I was ready to take this step. I woke up to the smell of coffee and Jenny's smiling face. She stood by the bed in a robe with 2 cups of coffee in her hands. I looked at my watch. It was only 7:15. I know it's early for Saturday, but I was hoping we could spend a little more time together before Diana woke up, Jenny said. She opened her robe slightly, revealing nothing underneath. "Well," I said, pretending to grumble, "maybe you can talk me into it." Then I smiled. "How about a few minutes with coffee and conversation, and then round two?" She simply nodded, sitting down next to me on the bed and handing me the cup. 10 minutes later, she was already fulfilling her promise. That night and morning became a turning point in the revival of our marriage. I finally returned to our bedroom, and for a while our sex life was as rich and exciting as in the first months of our relationship. Over time, the passion subsided, but the feeling of closeness and mutual discovery remained with us. For years, I think our sex was better than it was before Jenny cheated, perhaps because we both realized how close we were to losing each other. In our next session with Barbara after that night, a funny thing happened. When we entered her office, she looked at us and immediately smiled. "I don't usually make guesses," she said, "but this one is so obvious that I can't help myself. You finally got laid, didn't you?" We nodded. "And it was really amazing, right?" We nodded again, smiling widely. Barbara smiled too, this time completely shamelessly. "I'm so happy for you. This was a big step forward. There were other important steps before this, and there will be more to come, but this one was very significant. I'm happy that everything went so well." My return to the bedroom did not mean that all the problems in our marriage had disappeared, as well as the fact that we finished visiting Barbara, but both of these moments were important steps towards healing. I found that my love for Jenny remained strong, even unbreakable, in the months and years after her infidelity. The anger either died down or flared up again. There were times when the thought of her with that bastard Anderson made me furious, and I had to pace back and forth or take deep breaths to calm down. But in general, the anger gradually faded away, the outbursts became less frequent and weaker. Whoever said, "Time heals all wounds," was right. However, it took the longest to rebuild trust in Jenny. I could no longer take her faithfulness for granted as I had done for the first 7 years of our marriage. Now, any time she was late home, any disappearance from sight for a few minutes at a big party, any manifestation of uncharacteristic behavior, be it sudden thoughtfulness or, conversely, increased affection, made my heart clench. We talked about this, of course. We discussed this with Barbara and continued to discuss it among ourselves. Jenny understood the reasons for my feelings and knew that she herself had caused them. She never reproached me for my jealous worries and was always ready to explain where she was, why she was late, and give me all the necessary details. It was probably more than 5 years before these anxieties subsided enough for me to be able to cope with them easily. But Jenny not only remained faithful, she showed steadfast patience and compassion. What helped me eventually reduce my level of suspicion and fear was our happy life together. Perhaps even happier than before because we both tried harder. Jenny took every opportunity to show me her love, with words, small gestures like a special dinner, or finding my favorite wine that was hard to come by. My favorite way Jenny showed her affection was in bed, of course. From time to time, she would whisper to me in bed, "Is there anything new you would like to try?" Although she used to be quite conservative in matters of sex. Sometimes she bought sexy lingerie as a surprise for me. Jeno did not turn into a woman with unbridled imagination. She didn't use dirty words, and when I tried that, she was rather put off by it. She did not offer to embody wild fantasies, did not ask me to tie her up. I probably would have liked to try it all, but I was happy with what we had. Our sex life wouldn't be the hit of an adult movie, but it was loving and satisfying for both of us. My business continued to grow at a steady pace, seemingly gaining momentum from year to year. What started as a humble beginning gradually grew into a successful enterprise that attracted the attention of more and more major clients. In a relatively short period of time, I was able to conclude several significant contracts, which not only strengthened the financial stability of the company, but also increased its reputation in the market. A few years later, our annual turnover exceeded the impressive mark of $5 million, which seemed almost incredible when you remember how it all began. One of the key factors in my success was Terry, an indispensable right hand, and the person who literally kept the day-to-day affairs of the company under her control. She excelled at managing people, creating an environment where employees felt motivated and valued. Terry was the one who knew everything about the smallest details of our operations, from work schedules to logistics and inventory balances. Her organization and ability to see a problem before it even appeared allowed me to focus on what I did best, attracting new customers and building strategies for further growth. Her approach was not only effective, but also humane. Terry was able to connect with each employee, listen to their problems, and find solutions that not only improved productivity, but also strengthened team loyalty. I didn't have to worry about the daily routine because I knew it was under her reliable control. This gave me the freedom to focus on growing the business. I spent a lot of time meeting with potential clients, preparing proposals, and participating in negotiations to secure new projects and expand our client base. With each new customer, I saw how our capabilities grew and how our reputation strengthened. And although the workload was significant, I found satisfaction in the fact that our work was producing results. Business has not just become a source of income, it has turned into pride, a reflection of all the efforts put in and our ability to work as a team. Together with Terry and our team, we created a business that not only survived, but thrived in a highly competitive environment. Jenny also enjoyed a successful career in real estate. By the time Diana was 9, our family income exceeded $300,000, and we bought a large house in a beautiful suburb west of St. Louis. We also applied for membership to a prestigious golf and country club. I played a little golf in my youth and really loved the game. I hoped that Jenny would get carried away too. Our final interview to join the club was a typical example of how things worked out in our lives. We passed all the financial checks, and the interview was necessary to assess whether we were a social fit for the club. One look at my wife was enough. The members of the commission literally fell from her charm. Even if I turned out to be a complete idiot, they wouldn't notice. A week later, we were accepted. The club, especially golf, has become an important part of our lives. It turned out that Jenny loved to play, and after taking a few lessons, she quickly improved her scores. After a couple of years, we were both playing at 80 strokes well, sometimes. It turned out that our daughter Diana is a born athlete. She played football as a child, but after trying golf, she became interested in it seriously. She became good enough to win local and national junior tournaments. With excellent grades in school, she received a golf scholarship to the University of North Carolina. Somehow it so happened that after Diana's birth, we did not have any more children. The years after Jenny's betrayal were too turbulent, and then it may have seemed irrelevant. I don't think we really regretted it, at least until Diana left to study at UNC. After that, we felt how empty the house was. But there was also a positive side to this. Now Jenny and I had the time, freedom and money to travel and do what we loved. During Diana's first year of school, I surprised Jenny with a trip to South America in the winter, where it was the height of summer. We both loved trying new courses, so one fall we flew to England and played the famous old courses there and in Scotland. When we weren't traveling, my rapidly growing business required more and more travel. Even 10 years after Jenny's affair, it made me nervous. I tried to shower Jenny with attention and love before each trip, and to maintain close contact with her while I was away. I stopped saying, "Jenny, I'm still afraid you might cheat on me," but I guess she still knew I was worried. For our 20th wedding anniversary, when Diana was still in high school, I threw a big surprise. To be honest, I'm not sure Jenny was really surprised. I suspect she knew I was up to something. After all, the 20th anniversary is rarely celebrated modestly, but she pretended to be surprised. It was a big celebration with both sides of our family and many of our old friends visiting from out of town. We held it at a chic rooftop restaurant in downtown St. Louis, with stunning views of the city at night. The 25th anniversary would have been in June of Diana's final year at university. Knowing that Jenny would be expecting some kind of surprise at this time, I decided to come up with something special in advance and arrange it a few months in advance. Jenny loved ballet. We traveled to New York and Chicago several times to see performances of the best ballet companies. So I booked tickets for a Saturday evening performance in early December from the American Ballet Theater, which was on tour in Chicago. I planned a whole grand weekend for the two of us. Hotel, limousines, champagne, luxurious restaurants, everything at the highest level. I even secretly agreed with Diana to help me choose a new evening dress for Jenny. Over the years of practice in the ability to surprise my wife, I have learned to think through everything to the smallest detail. A couple of weeks before the event, I told her that I would be going on a business trip the weekend of December 9th, 10. This did not arouse her suspicions. There was nothing unusual about it. I then asked my friend Terry, who was also a close friend of Jenny's, to invite her to the theater on Friday, December 9th. It was a ruse. I just wanted to make sure Jenny didn't make any other plans for that evening. Terry was supposed to pick her up at our house around 6 p.m. They were supposed to have dinner together and then go to the play. In fact, I didn't go anywhere that day. I just said goodbye to Jenny, pretended to be leaving, and spent the day at work. My plan was to get home before her, around 3 in the afternoon, and have all the details of my surprise ready for her when she got home from work around 5 in the evening. The first alarming news came at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Terry came into my office with a worried face. "Brad," she said, "Jenny just called me to cancel our evening. She said that she was not feeling well and would stay at home to rest." I thought about it. Well, Terry, perhaps this is true, or perhaps she decided to make some other plans. In any case, it looks like my surprise is in jeopardy. Did she call you from home? I think so, but I'm not sure. I didn't hear any office noise in the background. "Got it, thanks, Terry," I replied. "I think I should go home quietly and figure out what's going on." I didn't know what awaited me at home, but I was already afraid of the worst than Jenny's poor health. As I approached the house, I saw her car, and also a dark blue BMW. It seemed to me that I had seen this car somewhere before, but I could not remember who it belonged to. My heart sank. Is she cheating on me again? After all these years? After almost 18 years of marriage? Trying not to jump to conclusions, I drove around the corner, parked my car out of sight, and walked back to the house. I quietly entered through the back door and stood in the living room, listening. There was no one below. Soft music was playing upstairs. Things only got worse. I carefully climbed the stairs. Music was coming from our bedroom. Before I even reached the open door, I heard, in addition to music, those sounds that I was most afraid of. My wife had sex with another man, in our bed. My first reaction was not so much anger as absolute sadness, a feeling of complete hopelessness. This was the woman with whom we went through so many trials. We overcame the crisis together after I caught her cheating the first time. 18 years later, I was confident that this would be a thing of the past. We were both in our mid-40s. I dreamed of 30 happy years with Jenny, travel, golf, vacations, and maybe one day playing with our grandchildren. My beautiful, loving, funny wife, who I thought would be with me in our happy golden years. But now she was sleeping with some man in our bed. I've said before that in times of extreme stress, I become focused and decisive. And it happened again. After just a minute of despair, even grief adrenaline forced me to start thinking and planning. I quietly went downstairs, picked up my digital camera, and returned to the bedroom door. Because of the room's layout, I knew I could lie on the floor, sit up a little, and take photos of the bed without being noticed. I needed to know who was sleeping with my wife, and I needed proof. Carefully sliding into the room, I saw Jenny and George Atherton. He was an attractive, respectable man of about 60, the president of our church community. He and his wife Angela and I knew each other well, and Jenny worked with him as vice president of the Women's Church Association. Even in that bitter moment, I thought how much he looked like Marlon Anderson, Jenny's first lover. Both handsome, both charming, and both much older than her. Just like her boyfriend in high school, and just like the professor I caught her flirting with at Penn State. With the flash off, I took about a dozen photos, more than enough to get everything I needed. I made sure that George's face was clearly visible in several shots. It may come as a surprise, but I didn't immediately rush in and make a scene. I had other plans. I lay there and watched. Then he said, "Honey, let's get ourselves cleaned up, and then I'll take you to dinner." I made a reservation for us at Il Trentino. Il Trentino was a very expensive restaurant, but it was located outside the city. Apparently, he decided that none of his friends would see them there. "Okay, George," she replied. "I'll take a shower first. I need more time to get ready." I heard her go into the bathroom and close the door. Then the water started. I thought about what I had heard. Jenny's response to George sounded cool, even a little distant, without much tenderness or excitement. From what I saw, it was clear that she didn't enjoy the sex as much as he did, and his words made it clear that this was probably their first time in bed together. Either way, they definitely haven't been doing this for weeks. Knowing what to do next, I quietly stayed in the guest room, listening to them get dressed. From their conversation, it became clear that they had lunch together during the day, and then George persuaded Jenny to come back to our house and go to bed with him. I waited until they came down the stairs. Then I heard the sound of the front door opening and closing and George's BMW driving away. I assumed they'd be back here after dinner, perhaps for another session in bed, or if not, he'd just give her a ride home. Anyway, he had a wife, so he couldn't take Jenny with him. I had a couple of hours. Strangely, I felt hungry, so I made myself a quick sandwich, ate it, and cleaned up the kitchen. Then I sat down at the computer, downloaded the photos, and edited them a little. I've selected 6 of the most compelling ones that show George having sex with someone who is clearly not his wife. After that, I carefully covered up Jenny's face and hairstyle so that she would not be recognizable. After that, I sent 6 photos to my work computer, printed them one copy at a time, and deleted all the images from my home computer and camera. There were 2 more things left to do. I called Terry, briefly explained what had happened, and asked if she was free for the weekend. We don't have to go to the ballet, but the trip to Chicago, the hotel suite, and the restaurant reservation have already been paid for. I sure don't want to sit here this weekend, Terry, and I'd appreciate it if you could keep me company. Of course, Brad. I'll be happy to go. Let's try to have a good time, despite the circumstances. I'll pack my things. You can pick me up when you're ready. And Brad, I'm so sorry. Thank you, Terry. See you in a while. After that, I sat down at the computer and wrote a letter to Jenny, detailing my plans for the weekend. I wanted her to realize what she had lost by sleeping with that bastard. Dear Jenny, this year was to be the 25th year of our marriage. I really wanted to express my love for you with something special and knew I couldn't surprise you close to our anniversary, so I planned a wonderful weekend for us. Here's what we could do. I was going to surprise you today around 5 in the evening when you returned from work with a bouquet of flowers and a bottle of champagne. At 6 o'clock, a limo was supposed to pick us up and take us to the airport. I had already packed your things for the weekend. We were scheduled to fly to Chicago on a private jet lent to me by a friend and client. In Chicago, another limousine would take us to the top of the Mark Hotel, where I had reserved a penthouse for us. Another bottle of champagne and a late dinner, which I had ordered in advance, would be waiting for us in the room. When we went to bed, you would find the new nightwear that I chose for you. We had a lot of options for tomorrow. We could go to a museum, do some early Christmas shopping, walk around the city, or just enjoy time together in our room. I made dinner reservations for tomorrow at Chez Louis, the best French restaurant in Chicago. After dinner, we were given 2 seats in the center of the stalls for a performance by the American Ballet Theater. So that you have something to wear, Diana and I chose a magnificent evening dress for you. It is already hanging in the closet in our room. I also prepared for you a sapphire necklace and earrings that match the dress. On Sunday, we could have a leisurely breakfast, take a short walk, and catch the plane back home in the evening. It would be a special moment for us, a way to show how much I love and appreciate you, a way to thank you for 25 happy years and look forward to another 25. I'm so sorry it won't happen. Your loving husband, Brad. I wrote this intentionally in the most gentle tone I could muster. I saw no point in cursing her and making accusations. I was sure that she would punish herself more than I could. And he continued to feel more sadness than anger. I was just so sad, because of the loss of a happy future with Jenny, which I was so sure of just a few hours ago. Because of the loss of trust in her, which I had worked so hard to regain after years of struggle. And even because of Diana, who will have to find out why her parents' marriage suddenly broke up. When all the preparations were completed, I turned off the light that was on in the house and waited for Jenny to return with Atherton. I wasn't going to let that bastard sleep with my wife again, but I wanted to see if it would go that far before I got involved. When I heard their car in the driveway, I quietly hid in the corner of the kitchen where I could see the front door and hallway. When they entered, Atherton was holding Jenny's hand and smiling as he finished telling a joke. She turned to him and said, "George, thank you for a wonderful dinner and lunch." He laughed and said, "And for the wonderful time in between." He didn't want to give up so easily. "Jenny, you are the most wonderful, most attractive, most amazing and enchanting woman I have ever known. This day with you is the most unforgettable experience of my life. I would give anything to hold you in my arms again. Thank you, George, but I'm not sure of my feelings right now. I need a little time." "I think we just need to say goodbye for today," she answered with restraint, but firmly, like the woman I knew who knew how to reject persistent advances. Why didn't she do this a few hours earlier? He just sighed. "Okay, my dear. I will look forward to the moment when we can be together again." He gave her a long kiss, which she didn't seem to appreciate at all, and then left. I watched Jenny as she closed the door behind him. Her face dropped. She looked tired and very sad. "Oh my God," she whispered under her breath, shaking her head. She hung up her coat and headed upstairs. I didn't want to scare the living daylights out of her, so I waited until she was up the stairs, then turned on the light downstairs. I heard her stop abruptly and turn around. I waited a few seconds and then said quietly, "Jenny, it's me." She still didn't see me, So I walked out of the kitchen and walked to the bottom of the stairs, looking at her. Her face turned white. She tried to say something, but could only squeeze out, "Brad." She looked like she couldn't move. I walked up the stairs, took her hand, and gently led her back into the living room. There I sat her down on the sofa, and I sat down opposite her on a chair. For some strange reason, I felt tenderness rather than rage. I knew I was going to upset her as much as she had upset me, and I felt sorrow for both of us and for what we had lost. I waited for her to speak first. Finally, she began slowly, in a subdued voice. "I thought you left town. It was a surprise for you for our 25th wedding anniversary. I have planned a weekend for us. Here are all the details." I handed her the envelope with the letter that I had written so carefully. She didn't open it, but simply held it in her hand, looking at me in numbness and despair. "How long have you been? When did you come here?" "I've been here for a while," I said softly. Then, after a minute, he added, "Jenny, we will need to talk. I'm leaving now. I'll call you in a few days, okay?" Without waiting for her answer, I headed towards the door. Having already opened it, I turned around to look at her. She had tears on her cheeks and looked like she had lost her best friend. I think that's how it was. As I was about to leave, she said quietly, "Brad, I'm so sorry. I know, Jenny." "Me too." If I couldn't feel anger towards Jenny at that moment, I was happy to direct all my rage at that bastard George Atherton, a smug, cunning, hypocritical bastard. Just 10 minutes later, I was at his house. When I rang the doorbell, his wife Angela answered it. "Hello, Brad. How unexpected." She smiled. "Hello, Angela. Sorry to bother you, but is George home? I need to talk to him, it's urgent. He just returned a few minutes ago. Let me call him. Come in." While I was standing in their hallway, George came out from the back of the house. When he saw me, he was clearly shocked, but quickly pulled himself together, put a smug smile on his face, and extended his hand to me. "Brad, how nice to see you. How are you? How is your wonderful wife?" Ignoring his hand, I stepped forward and punched him, drawing Angel back into the room. "You think you have the right to have sex with my wonderful wife, you narcissistic, hypocritical bastard." Angela ran up to me and tried to pull me away. "Brad, are you crazy? What's happening? Why did you hit George?" "Because, Angela, I'm sorry to report, but this afternoon I saw your husband sleeping with my wife in our marital bed." I handed her 6 photographs. She quickly scrolled through the first few, then gasped. "This bastard." I sat down calmly on the sofa. "Angela, why don't you bring your dear husband a glass of water? Looks like he needs it now. And then I'd like to talk to both of you." She looked stunned, but did as I said. A few minutes later, George sat down with difficulty in his chair. Angela sat opposite him, glaring at him with a look of rage. "Okay, George, here's how things are," I began. "You have clearly proven today that you are not fit to be the leader of our community, have you? So this evening you will call the pastor and the board of rectors and announce your resignation. You can say it's for personal reasons, health reasons, or whatever you want. I don't care. But you will do it. Because if you don't do this by tomorrow afternoon, copies of these photos will be sent to every member of the council. I'm sure they will be very interested in your morals and your actions." I paused to let the words sink in and then added, "And one more thing. Don't even think about dragging Jenny's name into this, because if you do, I swear I will come back here and kill you with my bare hands. Slowly, and it will be a pleasure." He didn't even try to resist. He gave in instantly, still avoiding looking at me. "Okay, Brad, I'll do it. Do you promise that the photos won't go anywhere? You resign and the photographs will remain with me. Although it's honestly a shame that more people don't know about the real George Atherton." Then I turned to his wife. "I'm sorry, Angela. Is it true? I may not have had the right to drag you into this, but I couldn't help but think that you would want to know the truth about him." She nodded, clutching the photographs in her hand. "No need to apologize, Brad. I have long suspected that he is chasing skirts throughout the community. It's actually nice to have proof." Without another word, I headed to my car. Terry and I tried to make the most of our weekend in Chicago. I felt bad for her, to be honest, because I was so sad that it didn't make the trip fun. We ate well, enjoyed some Christmas shopping in the decorated town, and opted for an entertaining musical instead of the ballet. In other words, I did everything I could. On the way to Chicago, I told her about everything I had seen, and we sadly recalled how 18 years ago I was driving with her in a similar situation after Jenny's first betrayal. As then, Terry listened with care and compassion, gently holding my hand as I cried. By the time we arrived at the hotel, the worst was over, and we were able to enjoy dinner and the magnificent view. Over the years, I sometimes thought about Terry, a beautiful woman who was already 53, 5 years older than me, and wondered what it would be like to have her not only as a best friend, but also as a lover. Without a doubt, I found her attractive, and I guessed that she felt the same about me. But it was never discussed between us, and perhaps that was for the best. There was a slightly awkward moment in the suite that night. Terry walked into the bedroom and came out holding the beautiful and incredibly revealing nightwear that I had left for Jenny. "God, Brad, that nightie on Jenny could excite even the dead," she said with a smile. I laughed, but then wondered whether I should offer it to Terry. She read my thoughts in my eyes and shook her head with a slight smile. "No, Brad, I don't think so. I love you more than any man I know, certainly more than my ex-husband. But you and I are better off remaining friends. And especially tonight, it wouldn't be right." I approached her with a smile and kissed her forehead. "Bless you, Terry. You are my best friend. And one of the reasons I love you is because you are smarter than me." We hugged, warmly and friendly, and then returned to coffee and dessert. Back in St. Louis, I found a couple of short voicemails from Jenny. In her lifeless, depressed voice, she said she was ready to talk when I was ready. I called her on Sunday evening and suggested we meet at her house the next day after work. She agreed, and after a short pause asked, "You still went to Chicago?" "Yes, I went with Terry. We had a good time, but of course it wasn't the same, Jenny." A long silence followed. I heard her crying quietly. I waited and then said, "See you tomorrow, dear," and hung up. I didn't feel angry. Intellectually, I knew that I should be furious, that I should hate my unfaithful wife, who had ruined our marriage for the second time. I should have been seething with anger, with the desire to scream, swear, and accuse. Isn't this natural? But these thoughts did not reach my heart. There I felt only sadness, both for Jenny and for myself. I didn't know why she let George Atherton get her into bed. Perhaps it was again about feeling needed, loved, attractive. But I knew that now she bitterly regrets what she did. She blamed herself, and quite rightly, for completely destroying the happy marriage. Seeing her pain, I didn't want to make it worse with my own anger. The next day, I called Barbara McDonald, our family therapist, and asked to see her. She was a little surprised, since we had not contacted her for many years, but after listening to me, she offered to see me. "I would prefer that you come with Jenny," she said. "I want to go alone. Jenny cheated on me again." I heard her take a deep breath. "Brad, I'm so sorry to hear that." We agreed to meet later in the week. When Jenny greeted me at the door on Monday evening, she looked like a shadow of herself. Pale, with deep circles under her eyes, she looked as if she had not slept for several nights. Her makeup was sloppy, and her hair didn't seem to have a comb. Apparently, she didn't even go to work that day. I had a hard time understanding how I should feel. Joy? Okay, that's what you need, bitch. Suffer, or regret. This is my wife. She is suffering now, even if it is her fault, but it still hurts to see her in this state. Or anger. To hell with it, I lost a marriage that meant so much to me. We sat down in the living room. Jenny seemed eager to begin. Looking straight ahead, she said quietly, "There will be no tears today, Brad." I cried them all out. Then she fell silent for a minute. Suddenly she said, "I was an idiot, Brad. A complete idiot." Her use of a harsh word surprised me. It was completely unlike her. I played it over and over in my head, as you can probably guess. Why did I do this? How could I do this? with George Atherton, that smug skirt politician. By the way, did you know, Brad, that many of the ladies in our community find him incredibly attractive? Everyone knows he's cheating on his wife, and I've heard some rumors about what an incredible lover he is. What nonsense. Her voice rose from apathy to sarcastic mockery, but then faded again. And the note you left me describing the weekend you had planned for us, it almost killed me, Brad. I almost cried all my tears to death. I think that's what you were trying to achieve. What a wonderful, amazing, generous surprise that would be. If only I could go back and undo everything that happened on Friday. This thought has been running through my head a million times over the past weekend. She fell silent. I waited and then asked softly, "Can you tell me about you and George?" She sighed. "He's been courting me for months now, Brad. I see him all the time at church meetings, as you know, and he always pays attention to me. I can't say I didn't see where this was going. I just don't understand why I didn't tell him a firm no weeks ago, even before the situation became inevitable. We had lunch on Friday, but I swear, Brad, there should have been 3 other committee heads there. It was just a work lunch. But when I arrived at the restaurant, there was only George there, a small table for 2 in the corner. He said that 2 of the other participants had canceled the meeting, and we would reschedule it for another time. He hoped that I would not object to such a consolation prize lunch with him. She grimaced. I go over and over in my head, Brad. We had lunch, drank some wine, and he was charming. I have to admit that turning 47 last summer threw me a little off balance and made me feel old. I know I still look good, but definitely not the same as when I was 27 years old, when I attracted the attention of every man on the street. In general, after lunch he brought me here, took a rather persistent step, and suggested that we have dinner in the evening in a really nice and quiet place outside the city, and I gave in. I just don't understand, Brad. She looked at me, genuinely puzzled. I called Terry to cancel the theater on Friday night and let him take me to our bed, and it was terrible. For the first time in my life, I felt like a woman of easy virtue. I felt what it meant to be one, to allow a man to use your body for his pleasure and try to pretend that you are not here. Nothing in my life has made me more ashamed than what I let George Atherton do. And then I went to dinner with him because there was no easy way out of the situation. I knew you weren't home and didn't want to make a big scene with him, so I thought I'd just have dinner with him and get rid of him. And when we came back here, I did just that. I don't know how much of this you've seen." She looked at me. I said, "I've been here a while, honey. I saw the last part of you having sex with George." Her face flushed with embarrassment, and she looked down. "And I could tell that you weren't enjoying it, that it wasn't bringing you pleasure." I started to say something else, but she raised her hand to stop me. She got up from the sofa, walked up to me, and knelt down, looking seriously into my eyes. "Brad, maybe this won't change anything, but I have to say it. I'm really sorry. It was the lowest, most petty, most vile thing I have ever done in my life. If you didn't know anything about it, it would still be bad enough, trust me. I would walk around the house all weekend, reproaching myself, wanting to scream, trying to wash it all off myself, like Lady Macbeth's blood. But the fact that you were here, the fact that you know what I did." She broke off, starting to cry. "I said I cried all my tears," she said, trying to smile. "It seems I was wrong. The fact that I betrayed your trust again, after all the work we both put in." She stopped, still crying, but continued to look at me. "Brad, are we done? Is this all? Have I completely ruined our marriage?" She was shaking. "I don't know, Jenny. All weekend I felt only sadness. Not even anger, just sadness. I wanted to grow old with you, be your best friend for the next 30 years, or whatever we have left. And I don't know if that's possible now. I don't know." She began to sob, kneeling at my feet, her head lowered, and I fought the urge to pick her up and hug her. I just sat there, dry but wishing that I could cry too. 20 minutes later, we were sitting in the kitchen, calmer, with coffee. It was dinner time, but neither of us felt hungry. "Do you want me to leave, Brad?" Jenny spoke tiredly, quietly, without any energy. No, Jenny, not yet. I have a hotel room booked for a few days. I think I'll find a decent apartment in the city center, closer to the office. Just for a while until we decide what happens next. Diana will come for the holidays on Saturday, she said in a trembling voice. I know. I thought about this too. We'll just have to deal with Christmas. And I'm going to meet Barbara McDonald on Wednesday, I added. Jenny nodded, saying she thought it was a good idea. After 5 minutes of silence, I stood up and said that I thought I'd better go. She walked me to the door, and before I opened it, she spoke. Brad, I'm not sure I even have the right to say this. She looked at me very seriously. I love you. More than anything. I know, Jenny. I leaned down to kiss her cheek, resisting the urge to hug her again, and walked out the door. My session with Barbara turned out to be quite dark. She listened to my story with compassion, giving me time to recover when I broke down in tears several times. I told her everything, including the weekend surprise and everything I saw and did in the house that day. Barbara waited a while after I finished before speaking. Brad, it amazes me that you are full of sadness, but at the same time you feel almost no anger towards Jenny. Why do you think this is so? Don't know. I noticed this too. I think the point is that it's obvious to me that Jenny didn't mean to hurt me, that she loves me, that she's just a weak person. Weaker than I thought. Unless I'm the most gullible idiot in the world, she really loves me. And she wants us to be together almost as much as I do. As I said, what she was after with Atherton was clearly not sex. It seems to have just been a bit of flattery and confidence. The only thing that makes me angry is that she could have gotten it from me just by asking. Yes, well, Barbara smiled ironically. Sometimes it doesn't sound so nice coming from your spouse. She already knows that you love her and want her. Most of us need a little of that outside adulation from time to time. And in itself, there is nothing wrong with that. But apparently Jenny went too far the second time. Yes, I said, but I have to pay for it just like she does. Damn it, now we're both facing the threat of divorce, even though she was the one who ruined everything. Brad, she hurt you deeply again, and you have every right to be angry, to feel like a victim, wronged. But remember that you have a choice in what you do with these feelings. Let me ask you a question. Forget for a moment what Jenny might want. What do you want? I thought about it. I'm not sure, but the only happy future I can imagine is with Jenny. I dreamed that we would grow old together, travel, do what we both liked, make love, albeit less often, babysit grandchildren. Well, she said softly, there's no reason why you can't have it if you want it. I snorted. But what if I can't trust her? And how can I trust her now, after this? For the second time, after all our work on the relationship. Brad, in the last 18 years, how many men do you think have shown interest in Jenny? I stared at her. Hundreds, for sure. And how many of them did she sleep with? I understood what she was leading to. Only with one, I think. Although now, how can I be sure of this? Barbara said, let's assume there's only one. Doesn't this mean that Jenny was trying to be faithful to you? I sat there, thinking about her words. Does this mean I should just say no problem and act like it was nothing, some freak accident, like she broke eggs on the floor? No, it doesn't mean that. But you might want to consider responding to this terrible decision in the context of all the love, affection, and loyalty she's given you over the years of your marriage. Listen, Brad, cheating on you is disgusting. This is a terrible thing to do. I've seen things like this destroy marriages. But I also saw how strong the connection is between you and how you enrich each other's lives. An idea came to my mind. Barbara, would it be wise to tell Jenny that I want to save our marriage, but she has to earn it? Not in the sense of punishment, but through actions that will prove that she really cares about me and that she is ready to work on it. I think yes. Of course, it all depends on the details. What do you mean? I leaned forward and told her my idea. She nodded thoughtfully, gave me her first comments, and we discussed it for the rest of the session. On Thursday evening, I called Diana at the university. I didn't want to bother her until she finished her exams, but she had to know that I had moved out of the house. I didn't want it to be a shock to her when she got home. We first talked about her studies, exams, plans for her last year on the university golf team in the spring, and a little about Christmas. Then I said, "Diana, I'm sorry to tell you this, but Mom and I are separated for now." "I know, Dad. Mom called me a couple of days ago. She was crying it was terrible. She didn't give any details, just repeated that it was completely her fault. What's happening?" "You don't need to know more than that. We're going through a difficult time right now, honey. This happens to many couples. This doesn't mean we're headed for divorce. It just means we need to work things out." I sounded much more confident than I felt. "But anyway," I continued, "we both won't be meeting you at the airport on Saturday. I think I'll let Mom do it, and I'll call you on Sunday, and we'll see each other, okay?" We talked for a couple more minutes and said goodbye. I was actually relieved that Jenny talked to her first. And even more relief if our marriage does end, our daughter will already be an adult and not a small child. The Christmas period was quite gloomy for us. Jenny and I met twice more to talk. Our meetings took place calmly, without shouting, but in an atmosphere of depression. I became convinced that Jenny really had no other connections other than her relationship with Anderson many years ago and with Atherton now. I no longer trusted her, but her voice, words, and body language convinced me that she was telling the truth. She was also insightful enough not to be offended by my questions, knowing that this was inevitable. These conversations confirmed that she loves me very much and wants to save our marriage, but it seems that she had even less hope than I did that this was possible. She was pretty sure that I would never be able to forgive her for what she did and continue to live with her. I met with Barbara McDonald twice to discuss my idea. We went through it down to the smallest detail, and in the end, I was confident that I had thought everything through carefully and that it made sense. Neither Jenny nor I wanted Diana to be caught up in our problems at Christmas. So they spent Christmas Day together, and Diana spent Christmas Eve with me in my hotel room. I put off looking for an apartment until the holidays. Diana asked a few more questions about our marriage, but I was determined not to drag her into it, and certainly not to mention her mother's infidelity. Between Christmas and New Year, Diana and I went skiing for a few days. It really lifted my spirits. The opportunity to leave the city, physical activity, and the joy of communicating with my daughter, all this turned out to be what I needed. When we returned, I called Jenny and suggested we meet on January 4th, after Diana returned to university. She offered to cook dinner for us, and I agreed. Dinner with Jenny turned out to be more difficult than I expected. We talked a lot about Diana, about her successes, plans after graduation, and so on. But when this conversation exhausted itself, it was difficult to find a new topic. So we ate in silence most of the time, although the dinner was delicious. Jenny obviously put in a lot of effort. She also put a lot of thought into her outfit and looked stunning. After dinner, I suggested taking coffee to the living room. Without delaying any longer, I started the conversation. "Jenny, I think it's time to talk about our situation. Tell me, what do you want?" She looked at me, clearly surprised. "Do you really have to ask that, Brad?" "Do me a favor," I said. "Imagine that I don't know. Just tell me what you want." Slowly and deliberately, she replied, "I would like our marriage to continue, Brad. I wish you could forgive me, somehow, and live with me again." And he loved me. Suddenly her eyes filled with tears. "All I want is for you to love me, Brad, the way you loved me, so wonderful for so many years, and how I love you." She stopped as tears filled her again. "But how can this happen?" she continued, sobbing. "How can you survive what I did the second time, and in our own bed? Honestly, Brad, I don't see how I could live with you if you did something like that. I kept thinking about how I could make up for this in front of you, and I can't. I just can't. I'll never be able to fix everything." She cried, covering her face with her hands, and I looked at her. If guilt was what I needed to see to begin to heal, then I was getting it in spades. I moved to the sofa and handed her a handkerchief, waiting for her to calm down a little and wipe away her tears. Jenny, if we both want the same thing, there must be a way to make it happen. She looked at me. But how? Even if you take me back, how can you trust me again? Or look at me without remembering? What did I do? I've actually thought about it a lot, and I have an idea. Do you think you want me back enough to work on this to prove to me that I really matter to you? Of course, Brad. Jenny, don't say of course too quickly. What if I ask you to do something really difficult? What if I said, do this difficult thing and I will believe in you again, believe that you love me enough to be faithful? The thing is, it really won't be easy. Now she was calm and very serious. She looked me straight in the eyes. I can't imagine what you're talking about, Brad, but I know that I owe you something, that I have something terrible to atone for. Just say what you're talking about. I took a deep breath. Jenny, I think we need to separate for a year. And for this year, I don't want you to go to parties or date men. Moreover, I don't want you to meet men alone at all. If you need to have lunch with a client, have him take his wife with him, or you take a colleague with you. I know how much the attention and admiration of men means to you. This is what got you into trouble with Anderson, and now Atherton. Therefore, I ask you to live this year without the admiration of men. If you can cope with this test, I will be able to believe that you are capable of being faithful to me. I fell silent, watching her reaction. So, I can date female friends, but not male friends, even if it's innocent. I nodded. And no parties? I nodded again and added, and no big charity dinners or dances with lots of men and women. She thought a little more. Brad, she said hesitantly, what? What will you do during this year? I will live my life, I replied. Work, travel, maybe date someone if I like someone. I promise that I won't start anything serious if in a year you fulfill your part of the contract. I will be waiting for you. But I'm not going to live the same life of restrictions that I'm asking you to do because I'm not the one who cheated in our marriage. Her lips trembled and she looked at me sadly. I don't know what scares me more, being so isolated from social life or the thought of dating someone else. She started crying again. I betrayed you twice, Brad, and yet I'm so jealous at the thought of you being with another woman that I just can't stand it. I hugged her but said nothing, allowing her tears to gradually subside. Finally, she stood up, breaking away from my embrace, and began to walk around the room. I'll do it, Brad. This seems terribly difficult, but that's obviously the point. And you should know, I'm scared to death. I don't know what I'll feel without men flirting with me, telling me I'm beautiful, letting me see that they're attracted to me. But what scares me even more is the thought that you will meet someone, younger, sexier, who will excite you and make you forget about me. She tried her best not to cry again. Listen, she said, can we stay in touch? See each other maybe every few weeks? It will be much easier for me if I can see with my own eyes that you are still in my life. Of course, I replied. And anyway, we'll be together in North Carolina for Diana's graduation in a few months. We can even fly there together if you want. She smiled at me, looking like a little girl trying to be brave. I'd like that, Brad. With Terry's help, I started looking for apartments in downtown St. Louis and found the right one within a week or so. It was nice to have enough money to choose what I liked without worrying about the cost. The location we chose was nothing like our home in the suburbs. The apartment was on the 28th floor, modern and bright, with panoramic windows in several rooms. There were 3 bedrooms. I planned to use one as an office and the other as a guest room for Diana's visits. The master bedroom was spacious enough for a king-size bed, with a huge closet and a bathroom with a jacuzzi that seemed larger than anything I had seen before. It could clearly fit 2 or even a family of 5. The apartment also had a nice, modern kitchen, although I didn't plan on doing much cooking, and it was only a 6-minute walk to my office. This place seemed ideal, and given that I no longer wanted to see our bedroom where I witnessed Jenny and George Atherton having sex, I was glad that I had found a new place that I liked. I went home a couple of times to pack my things, and Jenny helped me. I told her about the apartment, but didn't really discuss anything. She looked better than during our main conversation. It seems that the need to fulfill a difficult promise has awakened her determination. She threw herself into her real estate sales job and has already mentioned that she had to turn down 3 invitations to social events due to her commitments to me. One of the most frustrating things for me was that I didn't want to, but felt the need to control Jenny. I called Sam Abbott, whose detective agency once helped me with a difficult case involving an employee whom I suspected of stealing. Sam's people handled it quietly and efficiently, and I trusted them. I met Sam at the diner for lunch, and I explained that I had a personal errand for him. I wanted to organize unobtrusive surveillance of my wife. I'm sorry to say, Sam, she cheated on me. Now we are separated, and she has promised that she will not date men for a year. He didn't say anything, just raised his eyebrows. So I would like her to be monitored, but not all the time. Maybe 2 weeks out of each month for the first few months. And above all, be very careful. I really don't want her to know that she's being followed. If your people lose it, they'd better leave it than give themselves away. They can always find her again the next day or later. Okay, he said. What exactly do you want? First of all, photographs and videos if she is with men. If not, then just a weekly call to my number in the apartment. I gave him the number. And I'd like the phone in our house to be tapped, if it's legal. Technically, you still own the house, right, Brad? I nodded. Then technically you're asking me to bug your own phone. That's completely legal. We agreed on a time for his people to come to our house to install the equipment while Jenny was at work, and I thanked him. I'm sorry you're going through this, Brad. You don't need me to tell you this, but your wife is an incredibly beautiful woman. I hope everything works out for you. I was immersed in my work, trying not to think too much about Jenny, and did not notice how spring came. She and I spoke on the phone about once a week and had lunch together several times. The tension we had in January had softened considerably, and I think we were both enjoying each other's company. We managed to avoid painful topics and had great fun discussing our daughter. Diana was due to graduate from university in a couple of months and had already landed a great job at an art gallery in New York. In March, I went on a date with a woman other than Jenny for the first time in 28 years. Kate and I met when I was bidding on a project for a hotel chain that had one of its branches in St. Louis. She was a purchasing manager. We weren't chosen in the end, but a few months later I met Kate at a charity event I attended every year. Kate was a beautiful brunette of about 35 years old. I say beautiful with a caveat because she and no one else could compare to Jenny. But she was tall and striking, with dark eyes and a feminine figure. She was free and, as it turned out, showed interest in me. We danced a few times at the event, and a few days later I asked her out to dinner. Over steaks, baked potatoes, and excellent red wine, we shared our stories. Kate grew up on the West Coast in a difficult family environment, an alcoholic mother, an emotionally distant father, and left for college and never returned. Perhaps, due to the unsuccessful marriage of her parents, she herself avoided marriage. There were several serious romances, but she preferred to devote herself to work rather than relationships. I briefly spoke about my situation. In a few words, I said that my wife had cheated on me and that we were now separated. I clarified that Jenny and I continue to communicate and perhaps we will get together again, but this will not happen soon. So I'm not the best candidate for dating, I finished. Or if you don't want to get married, I, on the contrary, am the ideal candidate. I laughed. Anyway, Kate, I wanted you to know what my situation is. I really enjoy spending time with you, but I'm not totally free, whatever that means. Thanks, Brad. During our working negotiations, I realized that you are an honest person, and now you have confirmed this again. Then let me be just as honest. I like you and I can't deny that I'm attracted to you. But it looks like we should take it slow for now, although I hope we can have another date soon. I laughed again and said that sounded like a good plan. When May arrived, I discussed our travel plans with Jenny and booked tickets to North Carolina, as well as 2 hotel rooms. We had a wonderful weekend enjoying being together and focusing on Diana. Since the weekend was dedicated to our daughter, there was no pressure on Jenny, and we were just basking in love and pride for her. Diana was in her element. We were pleased that she was proud of us, introducing us to everyone she saw, her fellow golfers, her coach, her academic advisor, and several good friends. On graduation day, Jenny and I had happy tears in our eyes as we watched our little girl confidently cross the stage to receive her diploma. Unfortunately, just 2 weeks later, our 25th wedding anniversary arrived and went unnoticed and undiscussed. I didn't want to talk to Jenny about it or spend the day with anyone. I spent it alone, driving around the neighborhood, and then returning to the apartment and watching bad movies on TV. This was not the happy anniversary I had dreamed of. About 3 weeks later, in early June, I received a very unpleasant call from Sam Abbott. He called me regularly, giving short reports that Jenny was not dating men, and the wiretapping of the phone did not reveal anything alarming. But this time he said, "Brad, I'm sorry to say, last week Jenny had a long lunch with a tall man, perhaps a little younger than her, in his early 40s. They sat in one of the street cafes in the city center and talked for a long time. It didn't look romantic. She also spoke twice on the phone this week with a man named Art, who said he was coming to St. Louis for a business meeting. They clearly know each other well. This man is dark-haired, with a small belly and wearing horned glasses." I asked. Sam said yes, and I breathed a sigh of relief. "Sorry, Sam, it didn't occur to me to warn you. This is Jenny's brother. He came to the city for a couple of days. Jenny called and told me he would be visiting, and I should have told you." "No problem," Sam replied. "I'm glad that everything turned out to be nothing. I would be happy if all the money you pay me was wasted. Me too, Sam, believe me." When Jenny and I met for lunch the following week, something changed in me. The man, who turned out to be her brother, reassured me. I became less wary and a little less worried that Jenny was about to start dating someone else. After all, 6 months have already passed. Whether she sensed the change in me or not, we had a particularly pleasant dinner. I then suggested we go for a drive along the river before returning to work, and she enthusiastically agreed. We hardly talked, just enjoyed the warm air and sunny day. Several times I wanted to say something reassuring about our situation, but I restrained myself. Instead, I occasionally glanced at her, as I often did, admiring her beauty. I knew her so well, but at times it was incredibly moving to watch her. When I drove Jenny back to her office, she hesitated before getting out of the car. "Brad, I haven't asked you about this, but I think about it all the time. Are you dating anyone?" I wanted to answer her carefully. "Yes, Jenny, I'm dating a woman, but it's not serious or sexy." She looked at her hands. "Do you think this could get serious?" I thought again for a moment before answering. "Perhaps, Jenny, but even if it becomes something more, I think it will still remain an easy relationship. I still love you very much, and I remain true to my promise. I dedicate this year entirely to you." She was silent, still not looking at me. Finally, she said, "Okay, Brad, that's fair. You know how much I hate the idea of you being with someone else." She shook her head. "No, sorry, I know what I agreed to. Thank you for answering my question." I leaned down to kiss her on the cheek. She surprised me by hugging me tightly, almost desperately. When she released me, a bold smile appeared on her face, and she quickly got out of the car, walking up the path to her office. Perhaps it was the memory of that passionate, desperate embrace that made me surprise myself the following week. Kate and I were on another date, our 5th or 6th night together. A couple of times our evenings ended with wild kisses in my car, but we didn't go any further than that. However, this time Kate pulled away from our kisses and said, "I'd like you to come see me, Brad." Although I didn't push her, I had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Kate was very attractive and desirable. I hadn't had sex in over 6 months and had fantasies about her more than once. My wife and I were separated, and she cheated on me twice, so why not agree? But I hesitated. I seemed to freeze, and Kate noticed it immediately. She stuck her tongue out at me with a sad smile. "Damn it, Kate," I said, embarrassed. "I was waiting for your invitation. I even dreamed about it. But I don't think we should. I still feel connected to my wife, and you deserve more than just a part of me." She smiled and said teasingly, "Even this part. It's okay, Brad, really. I want you, and I think we could be a great couple. But honestly, I'm afraid that if we start having sex, I'll get too carried away, and your wife is still in your life. Honestly, Kate, now that we've decided to do the sensible thing, I'm terribly disappointed. You are so beautiful and sexy." She kissed me, then got out of the car. Approaching my door, she leaned over and said, "Then it will be a delayed moment. I cannot wish for you and your wife that nothing will work out for you that would be ugly. But if it doesn't work out, your first damn call should be to me." I laughed, thanked her for her kind words, and promised that it would be so. In a few sentences, we agreed that it would be better for us to stop our meetings for the time being. Someone once told me that the right decision can be the one that feels terrible. Based on this principle, my refusal to spend a night with Kate was probably the best decision of my life. By the end of the summer, I was feeling restless and irritable. The work did not bring pleasure, but nothing else attracted me either. Even playing golf seemed less fun, especially since my favorite game was with Jenny. Our meetings with Jenny became a little more frequent and much more relaxed. We could enjoy each other's company without stressing too much about our strange situation, without even discussing it much. But I don't think I fully realized how much I missed her. One day, my wise friend Terry came into my office and said, "Okay, boss, I'm taking you to lunch. Let's go." As we sat at the table, snacking on sandwiches, she asked, "What's wrong with you, Brad? I haven't seen you so distracted for a long time." "I don't really know myself, Terry. Nothing really makes me happy, and it seems that January is still infinitely far away." "You mean until the end of Jenny's year of exile? You're a fool. Who decided this should be the year?" I began to understand her point and felt uneasy. "Okay, I get it. It was my decision, so I can change it. But until the end, Terry, how can I be sure that she will keep her promise?" "Brad, wake up," she said with a big smile. "You told me about Sam Abbott's reports. She fully complied with the terms of the deal for 8 months. You always knew that everything would work out, you just don't admit it to yourself." "What do you mean?" I asked, still a little confused. Terry just smiled even wider. "Funny how you chose an apartment just for you, Brad. Large bedroom with a huge wardrobe that could fit a whole woman's wardrobe. Bathroom with jacuzzi for two, building a few steps from your office and Jenny's office. You fool already knew that you would live there together. So what are you offering me, Terry?" She just laughed again and said, "You're so smart, guess it yourself." I called Jenny and invited her to dinner on Friday, September 14th, but I tried to keep it as casual as possible. When I picked her up, we went to a cozy but very pleasant restaurant that my company collaborated with. The food was great, and we chatted easily about work and how great Diana was doing in New York. After dessert and coffee, still keeping my tone light, I asked if Jenny would like to see my apartment. She had never been there, so she happily agreed. I showed her the whole apartment, and she admired the beautiful view, the huge bedroom with a wardrobe and a jacuzzi. She had a few compliments on my sense of style, although most of the nice details were down to Terry or Diana. Then I said, "Jenny, I have a little surprise for you, if you don't mind." I sat her down on the living room couch, then disappeared into the kitchen. He returned with a bottle of cold champagne, 2 glasses, and a flat packaged item. "Why don't you open it? And if you like it, maybe we'll celebrate with champagne." Jenny smiled, knowing it would be a pleasant surprise. She carefully unwrapped the packaging and then was silent for a long time, looking at the gift. Finally, she looked up at me, full of tears, and said quietly, "Really, Brad?" Smiling, I nodded, and she threw herself into my arms. We hugged tightly, kissing each other again and again. A minute later, I picked her up and carried her into the bedroom. We were so excited. Thank you. You could not give me a more generous gift than these words. I know I don't deserve this, but thank you, Brad. We drank champagne, lay there, happily hugging each other, and then fell asleep. But the reconciliation continued the next morning. Jenny got up, put on my robe, and went to the kitchen. A few minutes later, I heard her doing something there, and then I smelled the aroma of fresh coffee. "Breakfast is ready," she called me. When I entered, I stood on the threshold, smiling. The table was beautifully set for two, with cloth napkins and all the necessary cutlery. In the center was a tray of bacon and scrambled eggs, next to a plate of toast, a pitcher of orange juice, and a pot of coffee. And in the very center, Jenny put my gift, which I gave her last evening. It was a wooden sign with the inscription, Brad and Jenny Calendar. January 4th, September 14th. 1 year. We stood in the living room of our country house, surrounded by boxes, full and half full, feeling completely exhausted. Jenny immediately agreed to my proposal to sell the house and move into my apartment together. The bedroom in this house held too many bad memories for me. I didn't want to sleep there anymore, and Diana had already grown up and left. We both worked in the city and liked the idea of living closer to restaurants and nightlife. We had sold the house and were now sorting out the last of our belongings, deciding what to put into the apartment and what to donate to charity. "Brad," Jenny said with a mischievous smile, "I want to introduce you to someone I know. Not here, but tonight in the apartment." I didn't understand anything, but decided not to go into questions. I just agreed, and we continued the endless packing. That evening, back at the apartment, we took a shower, washing away the day's fatigue, which, of course, led to another hour of love in the bedroom. It had been 5 months since our reunion, but we were still making love like newlyweds, or at least like newlyweds in their early 40s. After dinner, when we were already in bed, I said, "Jenny, you were going to introduce me to someone today. But first I want to say something that occurred to me this afternoon. Can I?" She nodded. "This may sound a little serious, but I think it's funny. I noticed, and you probably did too, that both men you messed up with were more than 15 years older than you." She immediately turned pale, as if I was about to reproach her. I reassured her by taking her hand and smiling, and continued, "This is even a little reassuring. 18 years passed between the first and second incidents, so if you promise me fidelity for the next 18 years, the next man you look for will be an 80-year-old. I think I can handle driving away any lustful old man who decides to hover around you." Jenny laughed, realizing that I was not trying to punish her, but just trying to joke. "Brad, how about I promise you my loyalty for the next 18 years and the 18 years after that? Then I will already be 83, and my lover will have to be 98 years old." I laughed at the thought and said, "Agreed. But in this case, I also want the right to have an affair with a 95-year-old beauty." We kissed, laughing, and after a minute I reminded, "What about that someone you wanted to introduce me to?" A sly, very sexy smile appeared on Jenny's face. She disappeared into the dressing room. When she returned, Jenny handed me a sex toy and said, "Brad, meet Brad." "Brad?" I asked in surprise. "Couldn't you think of another name for him?" Jenny laughed and replied, "I chose him as a replacement for you, stupid." Giggling, she continued, "I've missed you really all these months, Brad. My coworker Darlene, you remember, she's a little crazy, told me about a store outside of St. Louis that sold this kind of stuff and took me there. I was terribly shy, but she helped me choose, and I settled on the one that was most similar to you. So of course I named him Brad." She paused and added with a wink, "I knew from the very first day we agreed that I would have a year without a man, and the only man I wanted was you. I hope you don't consider this cheating," she said playfully, "but I decided that replacing you with at least something is better than nothing." But even then it wasn't as good as the real thing. We did it again. This was a new chapter of our lives, not a return to the old one. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.